you find yourself being left alone, find other chairs. All right, cool. Thank you very much. Can I welcome now our Executive Director, Dr. Paul Kariuki, to officially welcome us to this engagement. Yeah, you give him a round of applause. He's
colleagues, I trust you're all well, and I thank you so much for making time to come here this morning. We are very, very much also honored to have Honorable Shabisa with us today. We really appreciate you, sir, for making time in your busy schedule. And more importantly, also all of you who have been with us and working with us all through the year so far. It's amazing that the year, we are almost winding down the year. And things seems to be like somebody was just telling me this morning, it seems like at DDP, the year is starting again. There's a lot of activities going on, but at the same time, we are ensuring that. Okay, yeah. Right, we are good. All right. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Right, and so as I was saying, somebody was hinting to me this morning, it seems like DDP, we are constantly starting a new year because there's a lot of activities going on. We are kindly seeing each other more often than we have had before. And it's very true. We have a very packed year ahead of us, even as we speak now, because this year is a very interesting year for us and very important because we are celebrating our 30 years since our founding. And we could not have come this far as an organization if it was not for your support, ongoing support in doing what we are doing even currently this morning. So I would like you to give yourselves a round of applause for working with DDP to this time. And we are still going strong because we believe in partnerships. We really believe in partnerships. We cannot do this work of deepening the practice of democracy in our society unless we do it together with everyone knowing what they need to do in their own spaces. And this is actually the gist of why we are convening here today to have this conversation. As we've chosen, of course, we call it a conference, but really civic education is about dialogues and conversations between people and among people who have a common idea. And the common idea for right now in this country right now is what do we do with 2024? Okay, doesn't seem like it's really a good idea for you guys. But from our end, as DDP, it's a really very exciting idea. Because as you see, and as you've been following the news, our political landscape in our country is changing by the day. And if you really didn't have any clue up to this morning, last week, we saw for the first time the multi-party charter for South Africa being set together. That means we are going and we are heading into a very interesting time politically. And it behooves all of us as citizens to know what is our role now. But first of all, before even we define our role, we need to find ourselves in information. We need to understand what does that mean? What does coalition governance, even if you haven't had a chance, DDP published a book last year on multi-party governance at local municipality level. Please go on our website and download that book. It will give you insights because I constantly get colleagues and people who come into our events and asking us, what does coalition mean? How does it look like? What should we be doing together? And how do we trust our political parties? The issue of trust, yeah, is a big one. Somebody told us the last time when we were here at the Political Party Summit 3 weeks ago, and I would like to borrow his analogy. And he said, a coalition is like a marriage. Okay, so for those of us who are married, will understand what we're trying to say. For those who are not yet there, just lend us your ears. But it tells us that coalition is like a marriage. When you choose to be a partner with a person for life, it's the same bed that you've chosen. And I thought that analogy was very profound because what he was saying, it's difficult to jump out once you've gone in. Well, nowadays people do jump out. But ideally, he was trying to say by his analogy that the only way to make such long-term decisions that have long-term impacts on one's life, you got to know your partner. Yeah, and I think that was a very powerful analogy if we could borrow it in our political space or even in such space that we are convening this morning, because we cannot work together as civil society organizations, as activists, as government agencies, as political parties, and the like, if we really do not truly appreciate what it means to work together in a partnership that is constructive, that is respectful, and that is meaningful. Now, so my desire today is that as we engage in the various conversations that we're going to have here, because we have a very exciting lineup, we are honored to have very good, outstanding speakers by their own right, whom we are going to hear from today. I believe that you're going to be persuaded to rethink, first of all, your role as an organization in this whole spectrum of civic education, which is really about empowering and equipping people with information so that they can make informed decisions, whichever decisions that they need to do. But there must be access to information. But also, we are also going to trying to examine how is civic education really going to interact with this new changing landscape of trying to figure out what does the political future of our country look like? What sort of conversations should we be having? And how do we manage this access to information to ensure that those who do not get information are empowered so that also their voices can be heard? And so along those lines, I'm looking forward for a very exciting conversation today. And on behalf of the DDP team that has worked very hard to put this together, our founder, Conrad and Inuit Stiftung, and the DDP board, I would like to welcome you and wish you great and fruitful deliberations. Please engage and enjoy our hospitality. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Kariuki. You know, when someone says enjoy hospitality, it means there's lunch at the end. So we're looking very much forward to that as well. So as Dr. Kariuki has mentioned, we have exciting lineup of speakers. And amongst those, that lineup is yourselves again. I want to reaffirm the idea that yes, we're gathered to hear some inputs from the front, but it's important that we also recognize our own role in the space that we're occupying. And so we do look forward to also hearing your input. So we'll start off first with the Chief Operating Officer of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Mr. Lukhano Nir. He's now a comrade and friend, having just met in July. But, you know, I think I met my wife in a similar way. You know, operating in the civil society space, you operate around each other, but don't necessarily meet until the time is right. And so I think that now that if you're busy with your other stuff, you won't notice that there's someone here in the room. But now I've noticed Mr. Lukhano Nir. Let me just go through his bio briefly as he gets prepared. He doesn't like his bio, but I'm going to read the first paragraph at the very least so that we can give him a round of applause. You know, he's an amazing young man. Yeah, he's young, youth, you know, yeah. One of my friends recently got called a youth chauvinist recently because about prioritizing youth voices in the more important spaces. Lukhano Nir currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to catalyzing Africa's renaissance. In his role, Lukhano is responsible for ensuring the maximization of impact, quality, and synergy across a diverse program portfolio. I don't know if this was written by someone from McKinsey or something. He is accountable for strategic and operational efficiencies, as well as the overall execution of the foundation's program, development, positioning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. Once more, welcome to Durban, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. No, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. He's quite right, Pamanda. These bios are written for donors and funders. They're never written to be read out loud. So I'm glad that you didn't read the entire bio. Let me set a few disclaimers. I do like disclaimers. I don't speak for President Mbeki. I don't know what he's thinking about any matters. If there are questions that come about, my answer is going to be, I don't know. That's the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer I wanted to make is I generally no longer like giving speeches of this nature. And I was liking what Pamandla was saying earlier on, that this is a dialogue and a conversation, but I am a disciplined citizen. So I will do as I've been asked to do and give some thoughts from the perspective of our foundation. There's one other disclaimer I'll make, but I'll make it throughout the talk. Oh, the last one was, I've had a long week. So generally I don't have a written speech, but I haven't had a chance to commit anything to memory. So I'll be reading a bit. So please forgive me as well. But again, thank you so much to DDP and your partners for inviting us here today. We really think that this is a very timely discussion for our country. And for us, we would go anywhere to have this kind of a conversation in order to ensure that we are thinking very actively about our country and its future. So we do hope and trust that the outcomes from this conversation and dialogue will soon go beyond the walls of this hotel and will form a part of the toolbox of solutions for the many problems that our country and continent face. I often like to begin with the Constitution, often because I think we, in our public discourse, we keep trying to say, but this Constitution isn't really what we want it to be. But the Constitution really, at least in the preamble of the Constitution, really holds many of the views and aspirations that we have as all citizens. But our Constitution was deliberately and correctly designed to adopt a participatory development framework. So for the country and its democracy to be successful, it requires strong political conviction backed by a clear plan with equally strong community participation, determination, and action. This obviously must then debunk the notion that democracy or civic engagement at all levels, whether national, provincial, or local, is the sole preserve of political and administrative leadership, but must give thank you very much. But must give rise to the cry that the people shall govern. Maybe the best description of this situation is one offered by Raymond Suttner in his article published on the 25th of October in 2021, where he says that there's a general sense of things falling apart in South Africa. Today, something more than corruption or widespread ineffectiveness, but a broader system failure in the state at various levels, but also manifestations of social disintegration, breaking of already fragile bonds between inhabitants of the country, and apparently more extensive abusive behavior. The challenge for us all, therefore, is how then do we respond to things that are falling apart? It is no longer possible to seek solace in the idea that at least the ship is not leaking on my side. If we're in the same leaking ship, we're all going to sink with it. Which is why this conversation today is such a vitally important one. And I think as we all know and believe and understand, the current trajectory of our country, therefore, cannot be resolved by constantly blaming our past, which we cannot change, instead of using it to understand the present and to reimagine our country anew is not going to help. Constantly bickering against an obviously failing government can only be therapeutic, but won't solve any of our problems. Retreating into our own enclaves, whether racial or class, and hiding our heads in the sand can only serve to hide ourselves from the problems in our society. We're wrong if I don't say this. I haven't been to this part of Devon in a very long time. No, colleagues who stay here, we can't keep hiding our heads. This is genuinely not the way we must be accepting how things are. And I think it's the same way throughout our country, that we keep putting our heads in the sand and hoping maybe in another month, in another 5 years, it will get better. But there's a clear downward trajectory. The elections of the 27th of April in 1994 were truly popular, and the outcome of the elections had popular appeal. The elections of the ANC to form the majority party in parliament and the consequent election of Nelson Mandela as president received widespread acclaim. That was because the confidence levels of the elections have never been surpassed. It could not be lost, therefore, that the 1994 elections were the true expression of our freedom. And now, 29 years later, questions must arise, and they do arise. It is also fair to say that for the mass of South Africans, the democratic dividend continues to be elusive, and trust in the political dispensation is waning. Over the years, it is fair to say that the reservoirs of hope are fast running on empty. Almost naturally, trust in the efficacy of electoral systems comes to the fore. In other words, how truly does the electoral system reflect the will of the people? It is fair to say that the rising levels of distrust have been increasing, particularly in the last 15 years. And it's evident in the inability or the unwillingness of both the governing party, parliament, and broader society to hold this government to society, to account. There's obviously been this great despair in our electoral politics that it could deliver any change in the political fortunes of the country. And we see this increasingly as well. There are several pointers that ground the growing distrust in the political and the electoral system that it produces. First, since 1994, the electors in South Africa have repeatedly returned the same party in government, the African National Congress. And yet the participation in the successive elections has decreased both the participation rates and in the popular support for the ANC, from about 69% in 1999 to 57.5% in 2009. Another phenomenon is that nearly 80% of South Africans who voted in 1994, but in 2019, the number has decreased to about 6.05%. It is also reported that nearly 1/3 of all eligible voters registered to vote. Of the registered voters, nearly 1/3 did not vote. Of particular concern, as we all know, is that the demographics are such that youth voters under 25 are indifferent and do not exercise, or at least appear to be indifferent and do not exercise their right to vote. At least in that room, people are agreeing, at least in that room. Meanwhile, in as much as voter turnout is rapidly dwindling, popular expression of political dissatisfaction is exercised through community protests, boycotts, and vandalization of infrastructure, non-payment of rates, and for electricity and water supply, rising crime rates, and of course, through radio talk shows and in all language services across the country, it's very clear that there's a general sense of disillusionment in our government in our country. Protest is the voice of politics by other means. The feature of protest in South Africa is almost always about demands for service delivery. Indeed, there could be many other explanations for protests: widespread unemployment, poverty and inequality, as well as corruption within the political system that renders the poor and unemployed amenable to instigation by those who wish to leverage political power. Almost always, however, protesters in South Africa are always violent, disorganized, often incoherent in terms of their demands, looting results, arson, and many other forms of criminal actions. I suspect, therefore, there is often no way of judging whether many of the protests are popular expressions of political will or otherwise. The other side of this attitude can perhaps be detected in the quality of public representatives, the educational levels, capacity of public representatives, and the political process that is alleged to be capable of manipulation under the dictatorships of party bosses. The exercise of democracy itself in South Africa is inevitably a cause of conflict. There is evidence of a culture of alienation from politics and from the democratic state of democracy in our country. Those who are on the periphery of power politics always resort to self-help with devastating results often. And at Cape Town in the last 2 weeks is proof of that. Let me move a bit closer to what I was asked to talk about, the role of legacy foundations. Legacy foundations like ours have the responsibility and the duty, as well as the privilege to create, cultivate, and foster a culture where democracy is not a distant concept, but a daily practice. It is about igniting that spark of curiosity, that thirst for knowledge, and that hunger for change in our youth, in women, in men, and communities in general. Unlike our Western counterparts, legacy foundations in Africa and the developing world have an important role to play in our countries to defeat the scourges of conflicts, poverty, burden of diseases, and underdevelopment. Further, it is their duty to etch these important challenges in the consciousness of those who have political and economic power. Legacy foundations like others in the African legacy foundations like others in the developing world must respond to the following in particular. The crisis of a dearth of thought leadership in our continent. This continent of ours obviously really yearns for a new type of change agent who intrinsically understands these problems and are prepared to craft solutions. There's also an ongoing crisis of misgovernance, and which requires sober and patriotic voices who are not interested in contesting political power, but seek to train, guide, and cajole future leaders of our continent to be dynamic change agents of Africa's development. Contending with the reality that neither public nor private sectors are capable of economically absorbing the millions of young Africans into jobs and thus turning them into youth dividend as opposed to an ever increasing youth bulge that is ever ready to champion a neo-Arab spring, as we can see in the recent spates of coups in West Africa at the moment, that it needs us to think more actively about what we do with the young people on the continent. Lastly, these countries are inflicted by a huge burden of disease, and many of our governments, in many instances, need an urgent intervention, and rather an intervention is needed from them, an urgent one at least. Foundations like ours can play a critical role in both the physical health, but really also the general health of our society and the soul of our society. Therefore, these foundations in the main should be a space to deal with issues of good governance and policy influence, providing a non-threatening face to, or at least non-threatening entities to enhance social progress and rejuvenate economic growth, to be a necessary catalyst to challenge sterile thinking on politics, the economy, and social progress as well. In the final analysis for legacy foundations in Africa, for them to have the kind of desired impact and respect, they need to have dialogues both amongst themselves as well as amongst community in order to look at the challenges facing our continent collectively, to use their collective and individual strengths to design and champion programs to deal with their respective countries' development, to support and complement one another and our respectful endeavors. Let me give you an example of what we've been doing in South Africa, as several of these legacy foundations. Between October 2014 and May 2015, the foundations of prominent South Africans, those being Luthuli, Sobukwe, Tutu, Suzman, de Klerk, Mbeki, Mutlante, Mlambo, and Gerwel, agonized about the state of our nation. And we sought to make an assessment as to how far our country has progressed in realizing the objectives set out in the Constitution and what still needs to be done to achieve these objectives. And more importantly, whether as a nation we have both the will and the capabilities to do so. We raise this question because we realize that our country has completely veered off the objectives set out in our Constitution. It was important for us then, and as we do now, to ask the questions what went wrong rather than who went wrong. Let me pause and say, if there's anything where Rekhotofet and I disagreed in the talk, in the intervention he gave on Sunday, is this particular interest in wanting to go for the who. The who part is we are where we are now. In part, it generally doesn't matter who got us here. We end up spending far too much time in being interested in the who, as opposed to saying we need to get our heads down and just focus. And I still want to debate the intervention he made on Sunday. But our assessment then was that South Africa has achieved much to be proud of since its existence as a constitutional democracy. Amongst these achievements are stable legal and constitutional systems, institutions that entrench democracy, an economic and an industrial environment that is often modern and sometimes functioning, and a civil society that is often alert and vigilant. Notwithstanding these advances, there is a prevailing mood of despair and foreboding in our society, a decrease in confidence and an erosion of trust, all of which could undermine the gains of the past if left unchecked. This is not without good reason, given that all indicators that we've already spoken about show that poverty, unemployment, and inequality have risen to crisis proportions in our country. Evidently, public policy and our government have not provided adequate answers to the many challenges our society faces. Instead, South Africa has become more divided, politics more toxic, the economy more stagnant, and the divide between the haves and not ever wider. South Africans in general have never felt more unsafe since our transition to democracy. Crime is rampant and our criminal justice system is failing to stem the tide. Alarmingly, our human rights environment has not proved as dependable as could be expected in providing assurances to the people about rights entrenched in our constitution. As a country, our international standing has eroded. In the rest of Africa and elsewhere in the world, there's a grave concern that we stand the risk of losing the message of providing a hope for all humanity, which we conveyed when we were born as a non-racial and non-sexist society. And many have come to believe that democracy itself faces the threat of becoming weakened fundamentally. And in fact, many even disputing the fact that we are living in a truly democratic society. As we approach the 30th year in which we became a democracy, some deeper questions need to be asked about the adequacy of our democratic and constitutional dispensation, about our policies and the ability to meet the needs of the people for economic security, and whether or not we still have the standing to be meaningful partners for development, prosperity, and peace in Africa. We must also ask the question in all seriousness, whether the selfish material accumulation for its own sake is the only philosophy or dogma that guides our behavior as South Africans, or whether it is once more possible to rethink the need for human solidarity amongst us all. Fundamentally, how do we cultivate the type of leadership that is fearless, not self-serving, courageous, and with the necessary foresight to assist this nation and our continent to respond to these weighty challenges? But for the sake of us who are sitting in this conversation today, additionally, how do we cultivate citizens who believe that they have a voice, that their voice matters, and that they can actually make a difference in our society? We were therefore then convinced as these foundations and had to respond to these observations and make a clear assessment as how we got here and whether the Constitution is still the common instrument to provide us with such a guide. But importantly, as we sit here today, we must do a bit more than what these foundations have done. We must in fact do all that is necessary to help our country and the people to formulate a common agenda, a common program, and a common commitment to the future as well. and perhaps one last and there, to think about what it actually is to be South African. I think part of the impact of this, of all these challenges we're talking about, is a general degradation of even the idea of being a South African. There is therefore then a need to center the solutions that we come up with around ordinary citizens' participation. Unfortunately, such forms of participation seem to be limited to the kinds of protests we were talking about earlier on. Beyond this, beyond elections, there's going to be a need for much stronger dialogue and engagement amongst ourselves as citizens and communities as well. And what we then did and continue to do as these legacy foundations is to offer ourselves and the limited resources we have, material and human, as a safe platform for such sustained and purpose-driven conversations towards a common agenda to resolve our nation's stubborn difficulties. These are spaces to talk and not just debate, a space to listen and share each other, and more importantly, to act in consent with each other to recapture the imagination of a free South Africa that is envisioned and eloquently spoken about in the preamble of our Constitution. Ours as legacy foundations is to provide a platform for creative and concrete ideas, to provide without hesitation bold, truthful and honest answers to the question, where will our country be tomorrow? The dream of a democratic South Africa, a South Africa that lives up to the promise of its Constitution, that lives up to the desires that we all have as citizens, rests with us. However, citizen education and political participation are inextricably linked. They are joined together. For democracy to thrive, we need an informed citizenry, empowered by education and driven by the desire to participate in the governance of our society. But today, we find ourselves facing a gap that's wider than we would like, between the people's knowledge of their civic duties and their actual engagement in political life. We need to come together as government bodies, educational institutions, nonprofits, communities, and citizens. It is a task that requires the cooperation of every sector of society. We need to be working hand in hand, guided by the principles of transparency, inclusiveness, and shared responsibility. Because the truth is, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not a game you can win by sitting on the sidelines. It requires an ongoing process of living, a living organism that requires constant nurturing and constant attention. And that's what all of us who are sitting here need to do. There's a need for us to remind each other and broader society that democracy isn't just a system of governance. It is a way of life. It's a promise that every voice will be heard, every opinion respected, and every vote counted. Of course, this isn't just about voting in elections, although that's important. It's a journey that we must undertake together, not as disparate groups of competing interests, but as a united people striving towards a common goal. It's a journey that requires empathy, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the power of the human spirit. We, as the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, believe that we have a role to play in bridging this gap. We believe that South Africans can build a South Africa where civic education and political participation walk hand in hand, lighting the way towards a sustained democratic culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for complying. We appreciate you. Oh, cool. Well timed. Well timed. So you can have a seat there for now, Lucanio. Yes. Anyway, yeah. Anywhere there. In the front. Anywhere there. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's important those are important reflections. But before we sort of move on to the next set of speakers, I'd like to offer an opportunity for anyone who might have a burning comment or question that we can pose directly to Luca. And I'll take 3 hands for now in the interest of time, but there will be opportunities to also talk amongst ourselves after tea. But if there are any initial inputs, questions, thoughts. Mr. Mpungose in the front here, anyone else? Okay, nothing burning. Okay, cool. Okwamanje. Ningabe seniphumela ngaphandle senitoyitoya la. Ungasondela mnumzane la ngaphambili. No, ngenxa yokuthi sesi live on YouTube, we ask that you come to the front where there's better lighting. Sicabangelo lokuzana osanele. Yeah. Sorry. Ibuye ngishaye lento. Oh, inisho nyusake lithi. Ngicela uphenduke kodwa ya. Khona ama cameras okubona bafu. Penduka ya. Yeah.
Uba, sure. Fanmunani Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And greetings to everyone here. Khuluma kanjani ukuthi ngimflathele?
Khululeka uzokuzwa. Yeah, uyakuzwa.
Online now. Okay, thank you so much. No, okwami kulona. Number one, bengifuna ukusho nje ukuthi it's very encouraging to see someone omncane njengawo bhuti wami to head a foundation such as Thabo Mbeki. So it encourages us, nathi safisa ukuthi one day siyibone singama CEO or president if it takes us there. So number one, yeah, encourage ukubona umuntu onjalo, but khona ipart kade lokhu yisho mfethu, I think ubulokhu iphinda projecting ukuthi i-society focus on one goal and one vision, and ngisabathe ngiyahupa ngale vision nale goal, angazi ngipheleliphi. Mhlambe mangase mhlambe ungiphindele lo part noma uhighlight this vision okhuluma ngathi one day mase sihlangane sonke as society. Ngathi ngisale endleleni. Mangase nje ungiphindele lo part, I'll be very happy. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Luca, you got that one about, okay, cool. Perhaps, is there anyone else? I'm offering this to you as a last chance because I don't want, yes, Bab. You can come to the front as well. I'll take one more hand. I'm doing this because you won't have another opportunity to directly engage him only. He'll have other people joining him on the stage, so you might not be able to democratize that time period. So no. You can talk to him in your speech. So ngicela ukuthi nithathe nobabili ke baba, ngicela uqale ngawe laphana kwi mic ngemumva. Yeah. And then Joyce will come here when he's done. I think, okay. Bonge, ngicela ngishayele izandla, ngisebenza ngedwa la ekhaya. Yeah, cool.
Thanks, my brother.
Sure.
I think your age is encouraging others to strive for the best. We're living at a time whereby our society is divided based on the egos, based on the educational one they've achieved, and then based on those one that have never achieved at all or anything in their lives. Our society gap is being increased by what we have accumulated, of what we have, of what we think, and what we think for others, thinking that we know what others they want, and then we end up implementing things they don't need. Mental issues, it's affecting everybody, and nobody is talking about it. And it looks like umuntu khuluma nge-mental issue, si associate nabelungu and ukuthi izifo zabelungu, and then goes back with depression, ukuthi umuntu omnyama akanayo depression. Iy'ngane zethu manje ayisebenzi. They are consumed by mental issues. Abazali bethu nathi kuphelelwe imisebenzi. We are in that space of mental issues. Divorce rates it's huge based on the income that one have to bring on the table, mental issues. We are reading ingane that suffer from the mental space and parents in that space. And then by doing that, our society is being crippled by drugs. Specifically, I'll mention because of, I don't want to say Nigerians per se, but most of it is the people that are illegal immigrants. And nobody's talking about it. And then once our Ndabafana start doing those things, we are labeling them as people that are anti, of is not true. My brother, I think from the level of where you are, I'm pleading with you because you've got a platform whereby you are being listened, you are being trusted based on the seat that you are occupying at the level of a foundation, Gababumpeki. Let these issues of mental issues be discussed at all levels. As parents, as we grow, as Kulisabantwana in that level, we're expecting those kids to look after us as we age. Of which umengane says rebellious to teen bengatingana ifundisekile. And society and mental issues as ukuthi ingane zethu zikhule on an unfertile environment. So my brother, wherever you are, I'm pleading. Mental issues, it's something that you please edit on we discussion noma mhlambe we message oyithela umphakathi. Ngiyabonga.
Siyabonga kakhulu. Nkosi Mshayeli Zandile. Yes, Jess, you can come through. We're ready for you.
I thought you forgot me. Brian.
No, I didn't forget. Never.
I'll look at Sanele because it's a friend. So, yeah.
Oh.
No, mine is it's two questions, Brian.
Sure.
To the gentleman. My comment is on protests. It's just some clarity. I thought the point came through as demonizing protests. So maybe if you could just comment on that. And then the last one is AMA foundations. In the past years, months, there's a narrative that the foundations are hired sometimes to push certain narratives and to support certain factions. So we don't really see these days foundations doing what they're supposed to be doing. Maybe just your comment on that. Thank you.
On the subject of protesting, we also have a colleague from the Right to Protest, and she'll have some words for you. But I think the other thing that Jais mentions is very important and critical in terms of what the role of legacy foundations ought to be. And in some instances, there's a foundation that you mentioned and some that you haven't, that exists, in my opinion, to sanitize the political and sort of leadership legacy of some of these individuals. To what extent do they play a more transformative role in the work that they're doing, and be honest about the past of those individuals? I think that's but yeah, as you said, some of the questions you'll say Awazi, so it's important also to say that in our critique.
No, thanks. I don't know if you can working on that.
It's working.
Let me stand off. Let me begin with the first question. I deliberately don't offer what the common vision ought to be. I mean, it's presumptive of a single individual to say what this common vision ought to be for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes in these conversations that we're sitting in today to be able to at least distill the kinds of things that we're interested in. But if I were to offer a particular vision, I genuinely think it sits inside the preamble of the Constitution. If I was pushed to say, but look, Kanye, you don't scapegoat, give us something. If I was, it's the preamble of the Constitution. But I don't think it's a fair thing to continue expecting this top-down approach to the way forward. But it's in the course of these conversations that the principles of visions come out. And I think that's the kind of work we need to be doing more of. Agreed, Mhleka's one on the mental issues. You put it on this platform, so I won't say much further. You put it on this platform. I thought I was a bit more careful around demonizing a protest. I was doing a bit more than that. What I was attempting to do there was rooted in the idea of civic engagement. To begin with recognizing that protests are a legitimate form of protest, at least a legitimate form of engagement in society. But to suggest that it can't be the only way, and that there is a much broader engagement that's necessary in society. And so by all means, I was not seeking to demonize protests in and of themselves, but rather to say, because it becomes the predominant way of engagement, it has ways of reducing the possibilities of engagement. But happy to debate that one, and we'll figure out where we land thereafter. I can't speak for other foundations, and nor do I want to. But let me make it one or two general points. The idea that all these foundations have a homogeneous vision or homogeneous approach to doing things is as much as a fallacy as expecting that all of us in this room have the same view on every matter. It can't be a fair position. I imagine there are many foundations, many organizations, many political parties, many companies that are hired to do things. I mean, it's the nature of how our society lives and works. It just requires us to be more vigilant about how we listen and who we listen to, who's paying for things, what's the agenda, etc. That isn't a national foundation or a national legacy problem. It's a societal problem about when we have conversations of this nature, when people are doing things, who's sponsoring these conversations, why are they doing that, to what end? It's not just about a legacy foundation. But equally, I think it's wrong for us to expect any of these organizations, but particularly legacy foundations, to only do things we agree with. They are part of a broader society that are informed or whatever they're informed by. And so there are things that they will do that we won't necessarily agree with. But we can't say because we disagree with them that they shouldn't be a part of the body politic. And so I think there's at times an intolerance that builds up inside of us with ideas that we disagree with. And we then say, no, but this person shouldn't be speaking because of X, Y, and Z reason. This organization should not be saying this because they might get funding from Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We shouldn't get ourselves trapped in that form of thinking and acting. You make another point, Thomas, and I'll land with your one. I think it's only natural for both individuals and organizations to seek to sanitize the legacies of their people. These are organizations run by human beings. It's only natural for them to do that. Whether it's in the best interest of our society is a separate matter. But I think it's a kind of thing that, again, I know exactly the individual you have in mind, the ones that I mentioned there. From their perspective, it's only natural that they would want to paint that particular individual in the best possible light. But it's an incumbent on us, and the onus is on us in society to say, so, we hear you, but no, that's not it. In the same way, we expect that of our foundation. We're not without a view. We're not neutral. We have a very particular strong view on many things. And we will hold that view, whether you agree with it, whether you disagree with it. But in the course of engagements like this, we will say, but look, Kanyo, so-and-so foundation, you're wrong here for such and such a reason. But that's the nature of dialoguing and engaging society.
All right, you may take your seat amongst the people once more. We'll now hand over to, hey, yeah, okay. Mzayibonela na nothing boneni. We're going to welcome Mutobani Zigalala, who is an independent candidate. Ngaibo, I'm speaking to your future, sorry. You know, you must receive. He's an independent analyst, rather, I should say. And perhaps the word candidate is a slip of the tongue because of the political animal that he is. Very engaged in the body politic of KZN in particular, but also very astute in terms of the ways in which he delivers incisive political analysis about the state of our politics in this country. He is a friend of the workers through his work with some of the unions here in Durban. And so we welcome his input and we welcome his engagement. As he takes off his glasses.
Siyazwakala. Hayi asizwakali thina mfowethu. Asizwakali. Sanibona. Linjani? Njomani. Uzongipha isikhathi esingakanani mfowethu? Okay. Khuleka mfowethu ngenze uqinisekisa ukuthi lokho enginakho la kuyikhona. Akunankinga. Asinibingeleleke sanibona igama lami nguThobani ngakazikalala. Of course, nice things have been said about me. I just wanted to confirm that my name is correct. The other things are Mhlongo's views, not mine. So I don't want to stand here and carry the pressure of incisive views and all those nice English terms he was using. My role here is very simple but complex. I was speaking to some friends of mine earlier that my role here is very simple but complex. So I'm going to try to say the most simplest of things. And when I become too simple, please forgive me, right? But I'm going to say the most simple of things. I don't want to try to be too complex because I think the role I've been giving is a bit much more complex and difficult. But I'm going to start here, right? That in political parties as a conduit in making sure that political accountability and institutional accountability happens. The biggest issue, right? And as Lukhanya was speaking, I was speaking to Tabile there, and I was saying the biggest issue in politics is the issue of legitimacy. Legitimacy is the biggest currency in politics. Who is legitimate to speak and speak about what and do what, right? That is very important. So we can say all the nice things. We can become the most beautiful political party with the most beautiful logos and everything. But if people don't view us as legitimate to speak about issues, we can't speak, right? There are spaces that we will go and we will almost be shut out, not because democracy is not valued, but because we haven't bought ourselves and we haven't paid our dues in terms of legitimacy. So most of the time, political parties and political institutions are not very much cognizant of this fact that legitimacy is very important, right? So I'm going to start there. But part of my work is to speak about what must happen in political parties inside and as they do their work in society to make sure that society is able to hold government accountable, hold political institutions accountable, to make sure that democracy works. So I'm going to start inside political parties. Having had the privilege of being part of political parties in the past, I think I have a bit of knowledge of how things work in political parties. And having engaged, and as Mhlongo was saying, that because we are political animals, we've engaged different people in different political parties. You know, one of the biggest problems, biggest things that must happen, I'm going to speak about stages of political development later. But one of the things that happens in political parties, and is very important, is the issue of is there, before there is political accountability outside, is there internal political accountability systems in place, right? So many political parties hold conferences every other 5 years, and old political conferences every other 2-3 years, general what, and many other these things, depending on what they call them. But what we have noted is that many of these conferences are merely occasions of performed or choreographed democracy. In that, people are put into the room to legitimize what the elite of the party have already agreed on. I don't know if you hear me. So the problem is that it starts there, right? That you have a situation where, and Babshabis, I may make an example about you because you are the only one here. It is not because I'm taking a jab at you and the party you lead. So, for example, Bob Tlabisa is here, is the president of the Inkatha Freedom Party and a member of the provincial legislature. If Inkatha Freedom Party wants to have society, one, giving it legitimacy to speak and having its members being legitimate political auditors of society, it must start inside the Inkatha Freedom Party. We must see that members of Inkatha Freedom Party are able to hold their leaders accountable and are able to speak out and be able to do their political work inside the party before we are able as society to listen to them. I don't know if you hear what I'm saying, but there's somewhere I'm going with this. So political training and ideological training inside political parties and the establishment of clear, transparent accountability systems inside political parties is the most critical thing for political parties to be able to, one, buy themselves the currency of legitimacy and being able to do their political work in society. So what we have seen, there's a trend, at least in the times that we have had to engage politics, and in the 30 years of South Africa's democracy, I think I've interacted with politics for at least 10 to 15 years. So at least what we have seen is that most political parties in South Africa do not have internal democracy, do not have internal accountability systems. What you have is a situation of elite pacts inside the party, and any accountability that happens according to the interest of particular elites in the party. So then emerges this idea that people have been speaking about, that there is factionalism in political parties. I want to dispel that myth. There is no factions in South Africa. There is no political factions in South Africa, in any political party. What we have in South Africa in political parties are groups of elites who have got particular interest. So what we will call groups of political interest. Now, why do I say that there are no factions? I say there are no factions because in how we have studied factions since the beginning, from time to time, we have arrived at a point where political factions have got a clear political agenda, a clear political ideology, a clear political program. In most of these parties where they claim to have factions, you will ask yourself, if this is a faction, what is their political program? What is this thing that they are backing inside the party to take the party to which direction? Right? So if we don't have clear programs, for example, I saw that the provincial convener of Rise Mzansi is here. So if, for example, in Rise Mzansi, there are two factions, one that says President, National Convener, the leader, Zibi, is not right, and Nonkulego Mhlongo must be the one who leads. Beside politics of personalities, of who must lead, there must be a political program. To say, we see the political landscape in this way, and this is the direction that we want to take. If there is no such, then the faction does not exist. It's a matter of interest of leading so that you can be in proximity of power, you can be in proximity of state administration. And this is what we have seen in many of these political parties, but I digress. I wasn't going there. The second thing, so we speak about the idea of internal accountability systems. The second thing is, I struggle in South Africa. That's why the last time I was here, I think, Brian, I spoke about the idea that there are no political alternatives in South Africa. Because the reason for that is because I struggle to see the ideological outlooks of many of these parties. I see, we have a political system in South Africa that is very issue-based. That seems very liberal, but it's not, because their liberalism is not very crystallized for you to be able to say that this is a liberal party. Now, what I'm saying is this, is that you need to have clear, if a political party first, before you even go to society, you must have a clear ideological outlook. Why is ideology important? I know some of my friends will say I love to speak about ideology. But ideology, unlike the glasses that I'm wearing, is the glasses or the lens that you use to see society and to see politics as it happens. So let me make an example. A Marxist sees the political economy and the political landscape in a particular way, right? So for example, a Marxist will come to South Africa and say, South Africa is a capitalist political economy, and there are different classes and all those things, right? And you will find that maybe a liberal will see the political landscape is in a different way. The most critical thing as we train our political workers and parties is to make sure that this ideological training happens. That political people, our political members and political party members and political workers are able to use this lens and to know this lens that we use to see society, so that we are able to explain to society. Because the problem you have in South Africa, for example, on migration, right? There's many debate that's happening in migration, immigrants, what that's happening in South Africa. But what we are failing to have in this conversation is a conversation that stems from different lenses. So you have a situation where people are saying legal migrants must go, they must stay, they must what, but you don't have an ideological debate of, for example, if people are speaking about open borders, what does that mean? Does that really mean that there will be no fences and no border? What does it mean? But if you don't have proper political training and ideological training inside your parties, what is going to happen is that society will not be able to hear what your view on migration is. And you may be misconstrued. Some people will never hear you because you have failed yourself inside the party to train yourself. You know, in some political parties, there's no political education whatsoever. None. Not that it happens. There is no such thing. It doesn't happen. You know how some people get political education and political direction in particular political parties? Through press conferences and speeches of leaders. So people will be thrown into a room like this. It will be called a political a Chobani or a Sandile will be called in, will come and give a 30-minute speech, will clap hands and will go, and we call it political education. Political education is a very serious exercise. It's not about speeches, right? We must go through the text of the organization. That's why every organization needs to have its own literature that it abides by, that it believes in. That's why every party needs to have a policy document. Because when we're doing political education, we first train ideological training. How do we see the world? So that even the documents of the party, you will be able to understand them in that particular sense, right? To say, okay, if we say land expropriation without compensation, first of all, how do we see the world that makes us to make the demand of land expropriation without compensation? It is important because if you don't have this lens and you don't tell society about this lens, they will never be able to comprehend here, right? And for me, that's important. I'm trying to be very quick. I usually take a lot of time, Joman. I'm trying to be very quick. I even timed myself. So I'm trying to finish as quickly as possible. Of course, I'm speaking about the idea of elite pegs. Before I sit down, I would just want to go through this. You will see I will speak mostly about inside the political party, because I believe that once South Africans get right the political part, it is easy for the political party and its political workers to do work in society. The problem, we haven't got right the political part. So for example, I always speak with my friends about Sandile and say, the problem, man, many of these people who claim to be in politics, but jump on my steps, man. And today, at least, I want to try and go through what I mean by that. So I believe there are stages to political development, right? And these stages must never be jumped. No one must skip steps here. We must, when you are developing, you must go through the process. It's about 5 or 6 steps. So in politics, you start and begin as a member of society, as a citizen. You are there, you are a Sandile or whoever you are. We are Uzi there in society. Then a political issue, political problem, political agenda emerges. Those who are already swayed to this idea must convert ordinary citizens to one, supporters of their political agenda, right? That's the first thing. Then you must convert supporters of the political agenda or program, you must convert them into members of the organization, right? When you have converted them into members, ordinary members of a party, no, I am a card-bearing member, it's fine. You must convert them into activists of the organization. Now, these are people who are willing to go beyond just being a member, who are able to do the work of the organization, mobilization in society. Once you have got activists, now you must do the most important work, to convert activists into cadres of the organization. And this is where most political parties miss it. And many political workers, by the way, those who are doing politics and political miss this idea. Some of you move from being an ordinary member of society to be an activist, and you've jumped these steps. But the worst thing is that some of you move from being members of society, and then you are called cadres. Because a cadre, a cadre is the one who has imbued the ideas of the political party in such a way that he is now able to train others through these other stages. Now, from cadres emerges two types of people. It emerges what we would call commissars, teachers. Yeah? Those who are going to be the ones who carry the political education program of the party. Those are the people who go around training, doing political education training, because they've got the patience and the necessary skills for such. Then you will have what we will call, some people will call commanders. And by the way, don't pay much attention into the wording. Pay too much to the substance of the words I use. Because I know some words in society have got particular connotations. You will then end up accusing me of things. Okay. SIN. I'm not too far off. Let me just switch this off. I tried very hard. I'm 2 points away from sitting down. So I'm saying out of the cadres emerges two types: the commissar, the teacher, and the command. Leaders, those who give direction, who are able to mobilize people, bring people together, and give direction into the party. These are, for me, are the stages of political development for political workers. If you miss up any of those steps, your party will never be able to then be able to teach society how it sees society, how things happen in society, and how then society can be able to hold accountable government. As I sit down, as I said, there are 2 points that my small paper is now going to where it belongs. There are two things. One, Africa, and maybe most of the global south, but Africa in particular, is engulfed by what I would call messianic politics. Politics of personalities. You know, I am a student of Bantu Bigo, right? And Bigo in some of his writings speaks about the idea that society must never think that there is someone who's going to come from somewhere to come and solve their problem. This is Bigo speaking, not me. But from that, I deduce what I've called messianic politics, politics of personalities. That we have this idea, because the party has not done its internal work, and because it has not done its internal work, it can't do the external work in society. And because of that, the leaders of particular political parties will always be seen as the messiahs that are coming to solve our problem. Because we have not cultivated society to see themselves as important cogs of the political work that is being done. I don't know if you hear me, but I think I hear myself. The last point is what emerges of this messianic politics is what we will call proxy politics. And as I said, if you haven't done the work of cultivating political society and organizing society to be able to see themselves as important cogs of any work that's being done in society, what then emerges is what is happening in South Africa, proxy politics, where society then transfers their rights into political participation, their right of political work to particular people in society, and they sit at home. This happens because society has not been trained and not been made educated to understand that they are part of the political work being done. So what citizens do every 5 years or every election, they go to give you a proxy to do work for them for the next 5 years because they don't see themselves as part of it. I hope the little bit that we have went through, of course, we could have done a bit more, but I think I hope that a bit of what we have went through at least gives us. And I'm sorry for focusing much on the building of an organization, but I thought that's the most important thing. Because we have this type of society we have, again, because some people sit somewhere. You know, political parties start in a funny way. Mostly of them. Some people, 3 of them, 5 of them, 6 of them, 100 of them are friends, and they agree maybe politically, and then they go to some nice hotel, and they sit, and they decide after they drink a few glasses, cups of coffee, and a few glasses of whiskey, we are starting a political party. Now, you remember where I started? I want to end there. Because the political party is started in that way, and it's not started in a very organic way of rising through society. What then happens? You will start with legitimacy. That's why I started, and I wanted to end. Most political parties don't have legitimacy because of how they were started and how they emerged. They didn't emerge organically from society, but they emerge as elite pets of the elites. And then they become the instruments of the elites to do whatever they want with them. Which is why in South Africa, political education, agriculture, and civic education has not happened through political parties. Because maybe political parties were never meant for.
Thank you very much. Can you give him another round of applause, please? I think he lives up to my expectation of him. I put it out there and he did the work. It's important. It's important when you demand something of someone and then they deliver, you must applaud them as well. So we appreciate that, Nomzane. He was speaking there about the role of political parties in developing informed citizens towards electoral participation and institutional accountability. That small segue was because our sound technician, Dave Vijayan, was telling me that I have the voice for radio. So I wanted to show him that I can do a radio link as well. So that's, yeah, wow, give me a round of applause. You know, yeah, exactly. Yeah, listen, the power of the mic and who carries it is also quite important. How many times have you clapped hands for me for nothing today? It's important. So we've got Thabile Mdluli, who's going to be speaking to us next. You did acknowledge when you started off with your address, you were talking about beautiful parties and beautiful people, and then I thought you'd forget to mention Nonkululeko Hlongwane Mhlongo as one of those beautiful people. But beyond that, what I wanted to say is that we also have other leaders in this room who might not have declared themselves. For instance, we have chairpersons of branches in the room for certain political parties. We also acknowledge your presence in the room, Amandla. We have leaders who are also in council. Some of you I can see in one way or the other. We have proximity to power. Some people, when the mayor is having his gigs, they're also there in men's conferences, rubbing shoulders. We see you, welcome. But yeah, we just wanted to say that there's a variety of leadership in the room and we acknowledge your presence. We appreciate your participation. Guys. So we have Thabile Mdluli, who holds an honors degree in political sciences from UKZN and an undergraduate degree in political sciences and history from University of Zululand, Ongoye. She has recently graduated from the Young African Leaders Initiative. Oh, okay. I was like, who am I introducing? Oh, okay. Okay, so she has recently graduated from the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, the Civic Leadership track, and the Activate in Community Leadership program. Thabile was concerned by the lack of voter turnout by young people in the elections, and as such, she authored a voting manual, which aims to teach young people about the importance of participating in civic duties. She runs her own social enterprise called Uhange, I think that's how it's pronounced, but she'll let me know, with the aim of teaching first-time voters how South African politics works, how to vote and the importance of voting. She's currently receiving mentorship from the Social Entrepreneurship Program, Champions Program, based in Mangosuthu University of Technology, which is sponsored by the Department of Education, of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs, EDTIA. She's also being mentored by myself and Lulu Kanyo. I'm very sad that she didn't write it in her bio, but give her a round of applause nonetheless.
Sanibona. Ninjani? I'm Pila. So my previous speakers have pretty much covered a bulk of what I wanted to say today. But yes, Brian, you actually pronounced that correctly. It is Uhange. So today I'm going to be speaking about activists and pretty much the role that activists have had in bringing about civic awareness. So in starting off, I like to be a bit interactive. Ne? So I want to know from you, who here grew up in a big family? By a show of hands. By a show of hands, who grew up in a big family? Up high, I want to see. Is that relative? But yeah, honey. All right. So with what I've seen, a number of you here, and I resonate with you, actually grew up in a large family. Like myself, I had the privilege of being raised by my grandmother, and my grandmother believed that there was no boy or girl in the house. So if you're a boy or a girl, laundry, all of the above. And she also believed that, you know, if one person didn't do their job, we'd all get a whooping for it. You know, that's pretty much was the status quo in my family. And she would substantiate her doings by saying that not all of us would be lucky enough to get married to Dr. Paul, and that we really needed to be able to stand for ourselves should the time arrive. And then the second point, which is really the driving force of what I want to speak to you about today, is that she believed that as much as we were not, you know, necessarily bringing in finances into the household, but all the little deeds and pretty much all the duties that we're doing around the household really contributed into making and sustaining the household, which is really what I talk to you about today when speaking about activists and the role of activists play in developing civic awareness. I believe that activists have pretty much, you know, caught it by the nail or hit it on the nail, and have identified that in order for society to grow forward, it is pretty much, it is a group effort, if I can say so. That is a team effort that requires all of us to be part of the process. All right. So I want us just to take us back to you know, the 1900s. And I don't know if I'm disagreeing with Utsobani here, but I believe that in the formation of the liberation movements, or on the formation of, you know, political parties that would be part of liberation movements, there were activists. Those people were not politicians. There were activists who formed political parties to you know, address a particular issue, which at the time was, you know, apartheid. They really wanted to bring about the end of apartheid, which was causing a lot of heinous crimes on Black people and a lot of injustices. So that was pretty much it. It's the understanding that activists understood, they identified an issue and had this understanding that we had to come together into bringing about an end to this issue. Recently, we commemorated Women's Day, and we can attribute that to the Black Sash. You know, women from all walks of life came together in pretty much, you know, they've identified the past laws, and from all walks of life, they came together, marched to Pretoria to stand against the passing of the enforcement rather of the past laws. And again, it's that idea that we have to understand, that it's different people coming together with a collective understanding of what we are working towards or what we are fighting against that is going to bring about change. Right. I was expecting a clap, guys. That was deep. That was deep. All right. And then when we then move on to the 1990s now, when we started. So the first part that I wanted to show is the role of activists, which is pretty much showing us the understanding that it is a collective effort, that it is all of us working together, but most specifically that it doesn't matter. You don't necessarily have to have a high status in society to make a difference, that all of us, even in this room, can make a difference into bettering South Africa. So that's what activists have taught us. But now the second point that I want to get to now, looking at, you know, the 1990s, when we then start looking at, you know, CODESA, and pretty much we're looking towards the end of apartheid, you now see activists now playing a much deeper role, which is now bringing accountability, an aspect of accountability, which is pretty much being the fourth arm of government, whereby now they're saying that, yes, we've come together and we've made people aware of the societal issues that are facing us, but now we are saying that, you know, it's time to keep you accountable. And we can also attribute, you know, in the CODESA meetings, activists were there sitting, discussing, and we can attribute policies or frameworks rather, such as the RDP and the GEAR, which really set the tone to where South Africa is today and the development of the South African Constitution. But now that's where it gets tricky. We've done all that we've needed to do, and we have a democracy. And colleagues, you'll advise me here. I'm not so sure where we got it wrong, but in coming into a democracy, there was sort of this disassociation. And I believe a lot of the emphasis was put on, democracy being a system of government, rather than actually being something that we are actively involved in. And I'm still struggling to find the point of where did we get it lost, because activists were there and they were encouraging us to be part of the decision-making process. But when it came to 1994 and we voted, there was sort of a disassociation where we now took a step back as citizens and we let government take control of the decision-making process. And that has fundamentally caused the issues of what we see today. And it's caused a lot, especially young people, to be disassociated, to be apolitical, and not to want to be part of the decision-making process. And once again, we found activists now bearing the brunt on trying to sustain a democracy. And the question is, how do we sustain a democracy? Sustaining a democracy requires participation, active participation of citizens in the democratic processes. And then it leads us, which is where I kind of find it ironic as well, is that activists then now are trying to sustain this democracy. And then it raises the question of, is the government even wanting or promoting activism? And that's where the ironicness comes in, because as I mentioned earlier, I believe that liberation movements were formed by activists before they were actually politicians. And then now you find it's these very same people that were part of the liberation movements that are now going against activism. Because we've heard stories, as Sanel, I know I didn't talk to you about this, but we even know about activists such as Sanele, people who have, who have the credibility and have the ability to run for council and, are competent enough to do so. But you find that they'll get intimidated when time comes for them to, form part of leadership. So all those things, and that there's lack of protection of activists in democratic South Africa, which again is what I find very ironic, because the very government in which is formed by activists. And then I start thinking is that it's because a corrupt government thrives in chaos. So a government thrives, a corrupt government thrives in chaos. And that is the reason why we can say, colleagues, today we're seeing a lot of, the government really not wanting to support activists, because as we look about it, I can see we have right to protest there. Right to protest can attest that, the role of police officers in a protest is to basically safeguard protesters. And what you find now is that the police officers are actually the ones intimidating the protesters there, which then again, which leads to, because now there are consequences. I get we are Leonard, we've gone to school. Yes, we are passionate about bringing about, a new South Africa, but a girl has to eat, right? So then we become afraid of being part of these processes because we know that there are going to be dire consequences, which then has led to activists being apolitical. So you find people that were once very inspirational, you then find them now being apolitical, being disassociated because they know of the consequences and they cannot bear to suffer those consequences. So that's where the issue really lies. But we are a progressive group. We are very progressive. So in being progressive, I cannot just leave you with a whole bunch of challenges. I need to also leave you with some solutions, as you would agree. And so the solutions in thinking and looking at all these challenges that we are faced with, I then started to think, maybe some of the problems that we're having is because, yes, there is civic education. And I know my baby sister is in grade 6, and she was telling me all about voting in LO, and they're learning about voting. So that is that understanding that at a very young age that there has to be voting. But I believe it's in the inconsistencies in our civic education, because right now it's very topical. We are having these discussions, but once we're done with elections, it dies down again. Civic education has to be a consistent conversation that we are having, and not just only consistent. We need to give people the tools to actually say that, yes, I have voted party A, party B, and party C, and they're not living up to the hype. and they're not really doing what is expected of them. They're not championing my interests. How can I then keep them accountable? Because I believe you would agree with me, colleagues, that the issue is not that people don't want to go and vote, is that they are scared that if they vote, how can I then keep them accountable? So that I don't bear the consequences of my own actions, I rather step back and not vote. So that is pretty much what I've identified, and those are the solutions that I think would be very helpful in moving us forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tabile. Another round of applause for both Tobani and Tabile. Given that we're heading towards this very exciting moment in our program, that exciting moment being an opportunity to get a bite to eat and something to drink, I'm going to ask you to just wait there for a bit. We're gonna engage you just now. So we're gonna grab a quick 5-minute tea. What that means is you go grab something to drink, something to eat, or you go to the bathroom and then come back quickly and we'll continue with the rest of the program. Remember, I always emphasize this, it's tea, it's a snack. Lunch is coming later. Be mindful of others in the room. So that's what I wanted to say. But can we give them another round of applause? So we will resume promptly with our program in about 10 minutes. Please grab something, use the bathroom, come back inside. We'll engage going forward. Thank you. Can I ask Umbali Mkhize, uNonkululeko Hlongwane Mhlongo, Ubabhlabisa to the front, please. With our Executive Director, Dr. Paul Kariuki, and our comms, and Tessa Dooms. No, not in this picture, don't worry. To the front for a quick picture. Aye, man. Can I ask once more? Sondele, Paul, Dr. Kariuki? Was. Mam Kiz, uya khona.
Right.
Faka into Paul, faka into. Hey, some. Ngicela nihlale ngaphambili. Shona khona lethu. Luvuyo usakhona? Vuyokazi? Cha, cela ungibiza Luvuyokazi. Right to protest. Who? Oh, no, we'll invite them. This is just for the political parties. Yeah. Thank you very much. Can we have our speakers, Lucanio, Zigalala, Tabile, please join the picture. John, if you can join the picture, please. Yeah. Oh, Kala, wait 1 second. Not Noma. Oh, sorry, John. 1 second. They hadn't taken with the cell phone. Yeah. Leadership. Okay, sorry, man. Cool. Siyabonga. Can we now have Tabile, Zigalala, John, Lucanio come through, please? Oh, hey.
The ones who die young, I always that will be forever done. Daddy in the pool of sorrow. They're tripping cause there's still tomorrow. I wish I could be forever. And I hanging with the wrong crowd. Mama isn't proud. I know it's really nice, but I want to.
Yeah. Naman,
Want to take it. Sitting up, down in the rooftop, downtown. Love hurts, but being left hurts. Ooh. Oh, my sweet California, never once did you love me, never once did you hold me, never once did you tell me that you need me close. But I need you to want me, I need you to have me, to spare me a moment, you spare me a second, despite lack of compassion, no please. In my sweet California, been hanging with the wrong crowd, mama isn't proud. I know I shouldn't ask, but I want to. Take me back, take me back. Hey, want to take me back, but take me back. I'm sitting up, down in the rooftop, downtown. Love hurts, but being left out hurts. Ooh. Take me back.
Find space on my back to think I can't feel it by myself. Need inspiration by my side. No, I wouldn't talk, but let it flow. Right about the window, but you're not your head. And still, see, they don't know. They pretend, but they ain't done that much to deserve to. No, if they know. That's a lie. That's a lie. I know exactly what you do. Listen to can you see it's someone that all these cards in the sky. All on my feet. You say of this time. Let's explain. Send me away, I can't go. Oh, so big lips in my head, I stand. Help me, what I find. Reality is just living straight. I can't stay on my used to that I say that's something to stay. I can't play out. It's where I want it in the street. I know exactly what you do. Only thing I try. Listening to Frank in the sea too. Some of them die. Some of them. Even but the best to your mother, no hat sweet of so I'm craving it so amazing like pray. So I'm not so many you and losing it.
Colleagues, thank you very much. Just to illustrate that you can do the work whilst eating, I'm going to carry my plate with me. Please invite the others who are still outside to continue to come and join us. Nkosi Nkona Mpungose, Ms. Dooms, you may take your seats. All right. So we've had inputs from 3 speakers at this juncture of our conversation. What I'd like for you to sit around the table and start to talk about, okay. All right, I'll give it 2 more minutes before I continue with the rest of the program. Angaqhubeka talk amongst yourselves okwamanje ngabona abantu basabhizi ngaphandle.
So tell me, so you let me know to me and say don't understand. So tell me why you make this going
All right. Thank you very much. So as we sit to distill some of the inputs that we got from Utsobani, as well as Utabile, and in some respects, some observations from Ulukanyo as well. We are seated in round tables, and it's not a mistake, and we didn't want to have you put your food or anything on the table. but it's also about the ability to talk to each other and see each other. In some of these spaces that we gather, it's usually cinema style, and there's a top table. We only put that stage up there so that you can see uThobani ngoba mfishane. Ngoba nokho sithi kune top table. Uyahleka wafumsekela nomngani wakho. We didn't put a top table there to differentiate between yourselves and the others, or the people that were giving or prompting us in some sort of discussion. What we would rather prefer is around the table where you're seated, is to try and have a conversation about some of the stuff that you've heard and picked up in terms of the inputs. As a starting point, think about for yourself, what is it that stood out in terms of any parts of the presentation that we had in this morning? What is a lingering question for you? And what is your input into the space of civic education? What work are you doing to capacitate others around the concepts of civic education? Or do you think that all hope is lost, that there's no point to any of it anymore? So there are 3 questions once more. Think about what it is that stood out for you from the inputs that we've heard this morning. The second part is, what is your sort of reflection on the state of civic education in this country? What is the work that you're doing towards building the capacity in other spaces? And so what is a lingering question? What questions do you still have about the work of civic education in this space? Those are the 3 questions. I'm not going to put them up in a PowerPoint because angisebenzi leyo. Mithathu nje kuphela. The first question, what is it that stood out for you in any of the presentations that have been given so far? The second question, what is the lingering question or thought that you still have given those inputs? Or even though those inputs exist, even though Lukhanya spoke, even though Zigalala spoke, even though Tabile spoke, what still lingers for you about the concept of civic education in this country? And then thirdly, what is the work that you're doing with your constituency to build that capacity? Whether it's inside a political party, outside a political party, whether you're holding a dual role. I've heard some political parties say they work with civic organizations. What does that mean practically? And so, ngikadlile namhlanje ngishaya bonke abantu ningangisabi kodwa. So what is that work looking like? So those are the 3 questions that I'd like you to consider. Very important. Yes, you come in the room representing a specific constituency. Yes, you come into the room representing a specific political party, ideology, civic organization, etc. What's important for me as you have this discussion is speak for the I and own what it is that you have to say. It's important that part of the discourse that we have in the different spaces, we are willing to take ownership of the perspectives that we put out there. Sometimes hiding behind the concept of Tina, mina, noma umphakathi wami uthi, noma abantu abasha bathi is also quite problematic because it means you're shielding yourself, but also you're co-opting other people's voices who aren't in this room. It's important to own that and own whatever it is that you're going to be coming up with. The other part that I want you to keep in mind or be mindful of is that around the tables is important for us to have that discourse because not everyone is excited to go to the mic and speak to the mic because either I'm shy or I just, you know, sometimes in some settings like these, so they'd rather not speak at all. Or Zulu, so it's important to also acknowledge that language, levels of confidence, etc., impact. So it's important that when you speak in the space, you also allow other people who seem to be quieter to have an opportunity to speak and don't dominate the space. Yeah, that's it. You have about 20 minutes, 30 minutes for that discussion at the tables. We'll then drive our inputs in presentations and we'll have our panelists reflect on those presentations. Yes, Waran. Cool. Thank you very much. Go for it. So what I'm going to have, just a small intervention. Our colleagues who are at this table, singambala no sisogqoka isikipha sirise ngoba nayo sejoinile at some point. Bazosilekelela ukuthi si guide ama conversations. If you have any questions feel free to reach out to any of them. Ngicela nisukume nobathathu. Sukumani nobathathu. Nama-facilitators ami nina nganiqeqesha. Kanzima kabi. Sukumani phela. So these three individuals, as well as Paul Soti and Jais Mbewe, they'll stand up and they'll be walking around the room just to feel out the conversation. Pankatile, they are your invigilators to see if you're having the discussion that we asked for. All right, cool, that's it. Thank you. All right. Testing 1, 2. All right, colleagues, thank you very much. Yeah, usuphelile. Usuphelile 30 minutes. Yes, please. Yes, please. Siyabonga kakhulu. Thank you very much for your contributions. Siyabingelela kwaba ngababonanga. So we're going to ask uThabile and uZikalala babuele ngaphambili babhale phansi imbono nemizwa yabantu abakhuluma ngayo so that they can have an opportunity to respond. I'm going to ask Nyangizwa ngithi mina nizwa mina nizwa ngami nakule tafula nizwa ngami. No, but the ability, there's a colleague from the West who's saying it's Women's Month, but essentially they're pushing the women to speak. So the woman doesn't have an ability to exercise their choice in this instance. What does it mean? All right. So hands, volunteers to give feedback in terms of what the quality and quantity of your discussion was. Ngizocela kodwa kube uninginikeze a minute and a half in terms of feedback from your table so that we can take as many hands as possible. Leadership is nominated, has accepted nomination. One. Another hand, the other leadership who is yet to be elected, but someone with a lot. Yes, we've got you. And we've got you, sir, and then we've got that hand. Okay, for now. Kangan, okwamanje. A minute and a half. Yes, sir, from where you are. You may rise, sir, you may rise.
Sanibona endlini. Usandile wakangcobo lokhulumayo.
Awuzisho now izikuzayo angiphatha ngebhayo yakho kodwa ke now useyintweni. Ngiyadlala no carry on.
Yeah, no, usengishilo ukuthi ayichani kodwa ngeke ngikwazi ngiyaxolisa. Respectfully decline. So eyintweni ebesikhuluma ngazo la etafuleni ezivelile kuyinkulumo zekhulumo lezi ezintathu sezibe khona. I think 3 or 4 things. I'll try and wrap them up in a minute and a half. The first one was around the legacy foundations and the perception that they are ivory towers. What is the work that is being done?
I'm going to ask Lucanio to also join the panel because right of reply is very important.
What is the work that the organizing that Lucanio was speaking about by Ama legacy foundations around dispelling that notion that they are ivory towers, that they're not accessible to society as a whole, that their views are of the elite or the group that they associate with a particular person that the legacy is being driven for. Size uthi uThobani nodadewethu lapha. Kuvele indaba yokuthi inhlangano zepolitiki don't education on purpose because they want to membership or the masses of our society to create the messiah politics or cult-like political movements. There was a mention of an example of a political party. I won't mention it because society is watching. Because some associate me with a particular political party that is against that one. So but of an organization that has that posture right now. And then around the issue of activism, we wanted to define it in vernacular and called it ubuchantliziyo. So those that understand what ubuchantliziyo means is something that invokes a particular thought and you hold it dear. So that's what we believe activism is. And so activism is not it's not episodic. Akuyona into eyenzeka because there's a particular episode at that particular point in time that society is focusing on, but it's a day-to-day work. Senze sibonele ehlukahlukene from the different organizations that we come from. Ukuthi if ukuthi umuntu oward-based, ewadini yakho, your preoccupation must be how many young people are not employed, how many young people are interested in going to school, how many people within the society that you are in want to actively participate in the organization yakho. Umuphi umsebenzi owenzayo wena on a day-to-day basis uqinisekisa ukuthi le vision onayo nge-society ukhula nayo lapha ewadini la ukhona.
Amen.
A case in point, uphuma ama-post amaphoyisa, uphuma ama-post e-firefighter, kuney'nhlangano eziphumile zayo emphakathini ukuthi ziyosiza abantu ukuthi ba-apply.
Yeah.
Nohulumeni wephondo nawo wenze le nto ebekade yenzeka eGoli wakhipha usiyathesha waya. Apparently it's easy to apply for those posts online.
Yeah.
There are young people or there are people who are interested in applying for those posts, but who may not have access to data, who may not have access to computers to do those applications. Iy'nhlangano lezi ekhona ezithi zinama-chanhliziyo zenzani ewadini ukuthola ukuthi bangaka abantu abafuna uku-applyela lawo ma-post bangaka bangakwazi ukubasiza. Bekuyilokho nje siyabonga.
Siyabonga kakhulu Mholi. Thank you very much. A minute and a half silikhumbule kodwa ubalekile lembono kodwa uyibeka. The other thing that I really enjoy about political parties when they gather together and they hear that someone has said their point already, they say, I submarine. So please feel free to submarine some of the things that you want to communicate in case they've already been communicated. Yeah, bo? Cool.
Okay, iziningi into esikhulumile etafuleni njengoba nibona siyimbongodo. So kuningi okusithintayo sewumama. Kodwa into esibuke kakhulu siqala ngale ya bukhali. Thina esafundiswa ukuthi uma ufuna saqala saphethe ezinye inhlanga ukuthi uma ufuna uvulo lakho lizwakala ufuna ukuyisha emgwaqeni. So we are still saying that protesting has to be like not condoned ngoba sometimes that's how we express our views and make our demands to be heard ngoba sometimes sasithi sesidlulile so stage kodwa ngathi siphindile and siphindele ngoba sibona ukuthi kufanele siphindele. So ngoba what we think that the whites and ubhuti ukhuluma indaba ukuthi as concentrate ku the whites, not who. So what sometimes damage has been done by certain somebody, so or certain political party. So we also has to we feel that still we need to look at the who part. Okay, so we need to clear the difference between by activist and by politician, because sometimes people mix those and what political parties normally do when they see you that you are very vocal. And that's the only thing that you know, which we are quasi kulum. Because when it comes to implementation, I was loads. Then they take you back to jail by consent. So those are the things that those are political classes. That's why they're important at the issues. It's kubalekile ukuthi umuntu nimkhulume afunde nimfundise before nimbeke. Ingakho that's why there's so many killings. Sibangi ikhundla zokukhansela. Okay, no good to voter education as it's in youth. We feel that if I'm a political, voting why especially this Nazas why they need to vote. They call it at a very junior level. They understand, so that when they grow up, they will understand why do you vote? Do you need to vote? Ngoba sometimes people just go and vote because of the sake of voting. That's why sometimes when I go nezinto repertoire ngoba abantu bava nebacanga there's no one to vote for. I must vote uXaba. Ngoba uXaba ukhona sibonile khona. And siyazi ke ama political things behind when 600 voting, what happens. So people they're interested in those into egijimayo. And acknowledge people are still feeling that people are not acknowledged. There are certain people my communities mentorishayo ilento zani ukhansela labo. Kodwa mase lokhuluma lapha kwemedia kube ngathi iview yakhe kuphela. Angabe sa acknowledge phela ukuthi sasebenza nenye NGO engisizile ingivula amehlo ngoba civil society organizations ayavulana amehlo, guys, we have to be honest. So umuntu abasawa acknowledge kube ngathi into yakhe yena ezikhansela uqaba afike naye. Yes, and about Messiah, boy, and Messiah praise why. And the other thing, depression centers, guys, I think this is very important.
Yeah.
If you can't raise a person who depressed, go back also raise a muntu when you're depressed. So, all the thing. Talk about the before election, this I guess in our magical second and we are saying to our parties. Our figure team siwatshele balalele babuye futhi phela bazo implement izinto babuye sebenza straight sizwile 1 no 2 no 3 and especially crime community it's very high kodwa what you are told that ababesabuya bafike balaleli bemnandi babusabuya bazositshela phela it's okay sizoshintsha 1 no 2 no 3 sizonifakela i-police stations sizoniphiphela amaphoyisa and corrupt adayisa ama drugs. I'm
going to thank you very much for your inputs. I think there is also valuable contributions. I'm going to be a bit in enforcing the 1.5 minutes, and I apologize for that to the upcoming speakers. No, I must admit fault as well. I got you. So it's Mrs. Mhlongo, and then Ubafo. Yeah.
Sanbona, good morning. Igama lami uNonkululeko Songwane Mhlongo. I am the provincial convener for a political movement called Rise Mzansi. Uput Lukhanyo spoke about democracy not being a spectator sport. He spoke about it not just being a system, but a way of life. And I think Babu Mhlongo also spoke about speaking for the I when we give this feedback, because I think it's important to speak for the I because there's an element of accountability. We have this tendency as civil society when we gather in spaces like this to speak about political parties, the lack of internal democracy, the lack of accountability, the lack of voter education, the lack of civic education. But we always absolve ourselves from having that same responsibility. So when we go into communities, you always have the complaint of political parties only come out when they campaign and we elect them into power and they never come back again. We do the same things as organizations. If I were to ask organizations sitting here, how many of your constituency is not registered to vote next year, you wouldn't be able to tell me. Why? Because we think that voter education is for somebody else to do. If we say politics is not a system or it's not an event and it is a culture, when you gather with your constituencies who are South African citizens, what is the conversation that you are having? In 10 years' time, when we look back at 2024, what would have been the role of civil society in next year's election? It's not enough for us to take pictures, take stories of people who are affected, send them to donors and get funded anymore. That's not enough. It's not enough to center here, speak the greatest of English, go back home, post pictures on Facebook to say, I was at Ilangeni, hashtag civic education, voter power, but you're not having conversations with the people that we live at home. Performative activism has no space in 2024. So don't do the work of being an activist because you are waiting to transition into power.
Yeah.
Do it because it actually matters.
Thank you. Yes, sir. You, sir. Yeah.
How's everybody doing? My name is KJ. I'm from BMI. Travel across the states to be here with you guys. It's a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Yo.
The theme that so
I'm joking. Welcome to Durban. A round of applause.
The theme that we spoke about from hearing from the speakers earlier was mainly there needs to be a sort of renaissance around the way in which we go about civic education, right? Civic education needs to be in schools. You need to be talking to the youth about the way in which your political systems work, the way in which they can be involved in the system and how to go about making real change, right? There's something that we do back home called our LIT program, right? Our LIT program is a summer internship where we take the youth for 6 to 8 weeks and we teach them and talk to them about the ways in which power is had and how to utilize it in your community, right? At a local level, what it looks like to really be engaged with the elected officials in your area when you have issues with anything, because everything is political. There's no way power lines are down, load shedding is happening, water is scarce, and streets are blowing up, and there's nothing going on. And we're sitting here right now having conversations about civic education, and we need to be active. We need to be taking these issues to the people in charge and telling them, fix this shit. Excuse my French.
Hayi, khuleka French nathi siyasazi, we are francophone countries in Africa.
So there needs to be active participation, not just to be had on conversing, but on being active. Like Nkululeko was saying, you need to be doing more, right? Have the conversations, but do the work. That is all.
Thank you very much. There was a hand here. Ngoba ngisasiboni lesi sikhathi singaphambili. Nasi asoqala ngalesi. Mase ngiza ngalapho. Yes, Vernice. Vernice is next after that.
All right. Fastest report back of my life. Here we go.
Minute and a half.
So one of the things was raised earlier, but I just wanted to give our view about this making a distinction between activists and politicians. And we were saying it's really about time that we as activists start talking about our politics openly. We are being politically dishonest with each other when we say we have no political views and we want to claim that we are apolitical, when we in fact actually we are voters ourselves. So clearly we have political views. Let's rather create spaces where we can be honest rather than hide. The second one was around abdicating our role of civic responsibility to political parties or somewhere else, but also like dividing up political education versus civic education versus other things. It is all our responsibility if we're going to work with people. And then we also spoke about trust and the fact that we are not trusting each other enough. We think we are all sent by someone, the donor, the politician, and things like that. And then our need to start creating a common cause came up. And so we must start seeing what is the common cause that we all share so that we can then move together. Yesterday or 2 days ago, the UDF was celebrating 40 years since the UDF. And I always say the thing that united the UDF wasn't a common enemy, but a common goal.
Thank you very much. There was a hand, right? Yes, Vernice. Don't sabotage her. Give her a working mic.
1 2 1 2
It's
1 2.
working.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Bernice. I'm from the NESA organization in Newlands East. In our community, we faced many problems. And what happened in the last municipal election, so I got a phone call from the Good Party in Cape Town asking me if I'd like to stand and represent them as a candidate in Newlands East because Good was not running in Durban.
Good was not good in Durban, yes.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So they weren't contesting in Durban. So I decided I like their policies. I like their spatial and justice policies. So I'm going to run with this. And I did. But fast forward 2 years later, our current ward councillor moved to New Zealand. So now we had a crisis. Yes, he moved to New Zealand. He left us septic. So now we had an acting councillor. Now the ward was up for grabs again. So now I'm sitting with a situation where, how do I cast my vote? How do I lead my people? What is better for our community? So I decided there and then that, you know what, I'm going to phone the Good Party and I say, you know what, listen, my problem now is my community. And if the vote goes this way, we're going to suffer. It has to stay this way. So in order for the vote to stay this way, I need to move myself out and take my people and put my people here. So as an individual, I made that choice. And I made that choice to benefit for the betterment of my community. And today, you know, as political activists, sometimes we need to take yourself out of the picture and consider what is happening in your community. Because at the end of the day, all you are doing is to better your community. And right now, this morning, I was a bit late and I just sat on a table. And fortunately, I sat on the right table because this table, this young lady here is from New Germany, and she's also having youth crisis. This young lady here, she's from Inanda. Fortunately for her, she's part of the Inc. area. And then we have this young lady here that's from Wentworth, also with youth crises. Unfortunately for her, she has a ward councillor that's been the ward councillor for the last 28 years. How that's possible is unbelievable. I mean, how do we have a ward councillor for 28 years? He's a fossil with fossil ideas. And then we have these two young ladies.
Colleagues, yeah, fossil.
These, these two young ladies are from Amkababa, and they're facing the same problem with youth. And what our problem is with youth, and I'm sure it's extending into a lot of areas, is that our youth don't understand the need to vote. In the colored community, I can say on behalf of the colored community, when I ask them, why aren't you voting? They say, for what, Auntie Nessa? What are we voting for? We don't get benefits in education. We don't get benefits in jobs. We don't get internships. What do we want to vote for this government for? Nothing is ever going to change. So I have to agree with them, whilst also still trying to educate them that it doesn't matter that you're not going to benefit those things. What does matter is that if you don't vote, this is how it works. So our question, I know Tabisile can help because she's been assisting a lot in the communities. Our question to everybody here, how are we going to make our youth vote next year? How are we going to campaign to get our youth to understand that their vote is crucial and that their vote is needed? We can't be holding rallies, and Tessa, Brian can attest to this. We hold these educational programs in our communities. 90% of the time, you have 30% youth, and the rest of us are fossils, we pensioners. So we are tending to try and inspire our youth, but the youth are not coming out in numbers as they should be because our youth have a drug problem. So I don't know whether we're going to market this campaign by spaza shops where the drugs are being issued, or we're going to promote it via a lean bottle, or how we're going to do this. But we need help and we need to do something fast. That's all our problem.
Thank you so much, Bernice. A round of applause. The idea of being innovative about your voter education strategies, putting it on a lean bottle marketing. And I'm not making this joke to trivialize the subject matter. I think it's important that when we, I don't know if I'm standing in the middle, so I was hearing an echo. For time purposes, can you please raise your hand quickly? Those who've raised their hands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll start with you in the next round of questions. Yeah, please hold. I'm going to ask Tobani and Tabile to please engage us based on what they're hearing from the room. Yeah.
So I think there's a general understanding that we all have here that it takes more than just talking about the issue. Should I stand? Okay. So I think there's a general understanding that, you know, it's not enough to just speak about the issue, that it really requires action for us to, you know, to better our society. And, you know, apart from just, you know, us coming together, having a clear understanding of really what do we want when we have come together, what is it that we actually want? And I'd like to disagree with Venice here when she was saying that, you know, young people don't want to vote or don't see the need of voting. I think young people see the need to vote, understand why it's important to vote, but they are discouraged because they are not reaping the fruits of voting. And I think that's when then we can then come in as activists, civil societies today to then say, how can we give them the tools? Because as I've mentioned in my presentation earlier, I said that, you know, people want to vote, but it's that now I have to live with the consequences of my decision. But now we can encourage people to say that you can go out there and vote, but here are the tools that you can use if you find that the person that you voted for is not living up to the hype or to the standard, or they're not championing your aim. Sabotage.
That's me. I'm
sabotage,
sorry.
Sabotage. And then I want to speak about the idea of protest. It was raised that, you know, protest is something that's not necessary. Again, I'm going to disagree with you. Protest is necessary. And we've seen with the change that we've had in South Africa, it's been driven by protest. Maybe we can start looking at the way in which you can protest. And it's excellent that we have right to protest here. So they can also guide us in maybe the types of protest that we can have. So predominantly now what we have active protest, people in the streets. And that has pretty much has then led us to smokescreen politics where they can't address the issues because it's still hard. But in the long run, there are no policies that are put in place to actually address the issues that we're protesting about. The way in which we can have change is through policy change. So now if we can encourage that, yes, protest, but this is a proper way to protest or the effective way to protest, then we can see a change. Because like I mentioned before, is that we are protesting, and especially right now, you know, with the whole, you know, NSFAS and the lack of funding of young people, but the narrative has been changed to say that, you know, young people are burning things, they're burning infrastructure. The narrative has been changed and it has taken away. But if we can give young people proper tools to protest, then I really think as a society, we can get very far. Thank you.
Hallelujah. Amen. Quick one. You know, because I've been on many sides of this political landscape, one thing I've learned, and maybe those who have been in this political space, in politics, we all have roles, right? So we must not come here and compete on who's doing better. Everyone must play their role and play proper, so that we don't point hands. That this one is not, this one. People must play their role and play it properly, so that our political landscape can be enriching. Because the problem we have is that we seem to be competing for the same thing. You know, Sandile, you speak about chantism, right? Activism. We unfortunately have in South Africa or in the world what we may call jukebox activism. These days you love using this saying that says, he who pays the piper picks the tune. Jukebox activism. The donor, the leader decides what is going to be the thing that chisas in prison. And it's problematic. I know it's not going to land well in some people, but we must ask ourselves questions. When we start civic organizations, when we start political parties, campaign, whatever we are starting, we must ask ourselves the very fundamental question. Why am I doing this, and who cares that I'm doing this? Because people just wake up and start things here. And this is why the work is not, and Unonkulego is speaking about the work not being consistent and constant. I don't know if person gets us right in this. So that the work is not consistent, but it's also not constant, right? But Nonkulego, how is it going to be consistent and constant if he who pays the piper picks the tune? Because again, you know, the problem is that, maybe let's take an example in civic education, there are trends, right? So during COVID, everyone was doing COVID work. It's voting time, everyone is doing voting work. There was AIDS crisis at some time, everyone was doing AIDS work. Because there are trends. And unfortunately, the piper decides what everyone is doing. So everyone then channels themselves towards this thing. And this is not a criticism, it's just to say that this is the crisis we have. And this happens even with political parties. That at a particular time, a particular thing becomes an issue, and then you will see one political party not saying anything. Like, most of the country is burning. How everyone is supposed to be saying something. Why is Mhlongo not saying anything? No statement, no nothing. And then tomorrow something else happens. And then you see Mhlongo is the first one. Statement released at 7 o'clock in the morning. Like. Then you see the issue of politics of interest. That sometimes we need to be honest about these things. And unfortunately, in the liberal capitalist society like ours, the one who pays the tune is always there. But again, it's always there because, as I said, political parties and some of these organizations are not started organically. They are started somewhere.
Sure.
We must stop politics of exceptionalism also. Now, this politics of exceptions. It's like South Africa. South Africa, when they face problems, they think they're the only one in the world. You know, again, but suddenly it's this idea. We have not done the work in Africa. The work of training people, of training. And I acknowledge that the work has not been done. And some of us are the ones who are not doing the work. I acknowledge that, Nonkulo. That those of us who are speaking so much, some of us are not doing the work. But some of us are doing the work in the legal conclaves that we have. Because again, these things take resources. But we have politics of exceptionalism. There are people who think South Africa, they're facing their problems they are facing are just exception, and South Africa is an exception. We live in a particular world, my friends. Let me say this thing. I'm not trivializing the issues of mental health and whatnot, but I'm just merely saying we live in a particular world that operates in a particular way. And if we don't wear our ideological lenses properly, Sandy, we will not see that the trend of who is mostly affected by depression, who's mostly affected by bipolar, what all these what we call mental health issues. Because if we wear them properly, we will see. Then you will see that what society has done has made this an individual thing, whereas this thing is everywhere, structural. And of course, I will invite some of you to read the works of Fanon when he speaks about issues of mental health, psychoanalysis in oppressive societies. Because then we then get the right lenses and then we can be able to see this issue properly. Politics of performance, politics of being seen, politics of spectacle. Oh, we have that type of society, unfortunately. From our leaders, we were speaking with the president, Honorable Tabisa, when we were sitting down there. The politics of being seen, you know. Now everyone wants spectacle in this space. Civic society now, they are doing their own things. Political parties are doing their own things. Everyone wants to be seen to be doing something. But the question is, are you doing something? Or you want to be seen? You know, there are people who, these days there's this new trend of filling up stadiums. It's nice, everyone is going through the trend. Because again, you are trying to fit into the performance. So, you know, so we need to be very mindful of such things. That those of us who are doing work, we must do the work because it matters. Not because we are going to appear in newspapers. Unless our work demands of us to be seen, we may not be seen. And it's fine not to be seen. It's okay. You know, that's why there's this idea of unsung heroes. You know, there are people in our communities who have been doing work for many years. No one knows them. Because their work has not demanded for them to be seen. But we are very quick, some of us, to do a little bit of work and want people to see it because we want to be seen to be doing something. The youth vote, Sentlala Pants, you are not going to get the youth vote if you are not speaking to young people. And I'm not just saying, you know, when people are going to vote for you, it's because you have spoken their language in a language they've understood. You have drawn them up from where they are to say, whoa, let's hear what Dr. Paul is going to say. But if you're not speaking their language, you know, I see some political parties out there. And also we must stop this thing of sloganeering, you know. Yes, all of us want free education. But what is free education? What does it mean? Who stands to benefit? Why is it important? Because unfortunately, the youth vote that you want is very critical. It's going to ask a lot of questions. And also because it has seen their parents being disappointed for many years, They've disengaged from politics. They've seen in political parties, in political spaces, and in different political actors, civic education, or not, what happens to young people who have got a voice, how they are marginalized, how they are pushed to the side. They've seen this. So when you come to them, they are very mindful of this thing. This is why some of you will never get their vote. Because you are not speaking to them, you are not mindful of how much your political work has pushed them to the side. In South Africa, we've got 44 million people who are eligible to vote. Less than 27 million of them are registered. In the last election, less than 18 million voted. Do we have a government of the majority of the population, or have a government of the majority of the people at the ballot? The leading party in South Africa was voted by less than 11 million people out of 60 million. The biggest opposition to politicians and political parties, not to the leading party, the biggest opposition to political parties and politicians who are running the country is outside of the ballot. There's 27 million of them. They are saying we are not going to participate anymore. They're not even registered to vote. If you're not speaking to those people, then our work is useless. Right? We are continuously going to have a democracy that is an elite pact of 400 people who go to parliament and take their own decisions. And every time they watch parliament, they see the things you do, they see why they must not engage in that thing.
Yeah. Siyababona bafo, siyabonga. Thank you to both Zigalala and Tabile for those contributions. I'm going to ask now our colleagues from Right to Protest. People have been talking about protest the whole day this morning. So I think from a 20-minute presentation to presentation is now 10 minutes. No, I'm joking. You can do 10. Cool, I love this. Even you, John, even John is going for 10. Thank you so much. So I appreciate you. Yabona lunches also on the langokushesha, guys. Yeah, please. No, I'll read her bio later, but she's an amazing activist. She is based at the Center for Applied Legal Studies, CALS, which is the steering committee for the organization that she functions for, or the coalition of organizations that she functions for. The Right to Protest, which is a coalition of organizations that are trying to ensure that protest action is seen as a legitimate tool for engaging in our democracy, but also one that is respected as part of the legal sort of process and procedure in this country. She's a friend of Unkos Khona Mpungose. Siyabonga kakhulu Unkos Khona ngokusuggested uSisi. Apparently she's lived in KwaMashu before, doing the work on the ground. So when she speaks, don't think that as a person from Wits, she's speaking from an ivory tower. Vijen, I'm just trying to push time for you guys, by the way. So when you're ready. Oh, when she was a toddler, she was named Uvuyogazi. But her full name is actually Luvuyogazi, but she prefers Vuyogazi. Guys, to finish out.
Is this thing on?
Yes.
Your clap hands for me being a Luvuyogazi.
Wait, Luvuyogazi, 1 second before you continue. Where is Luvuyo? Luvuyo, come, just wave your hand for people. Can we also look at Luvuyo? He's wearing a rice t-shirt, but he's actually a very important part of the NGO space, particularly here in KZN, Clemonti and Dozen Hook. But he's all from the Eastern Cape originally, and today is his birthday. So we are very happy and proud to honor him with a gathering such as this. So Luvuyo, meet Luvuyogazi, he is going to address us now.
It sounds so rhyming. It's very good that you started the room like that because I'm pretty nervous. Everybody's speaking good English here.
You're welcome.
I know it's fine. I'm going to ignore the presentation I had because I thought I was going into a bougie place and people are not engaging, but I love the energy. As introduced, we are from Right to Protest. I always say we are because I come with my comrades in spirit.
We thought you were like, you know, part of the clique of the underground gang.
Oh, no.
Their past.
It's nothing like that. So basically, Right to Protest started as a response to a crisis in the country. fees must fall, as you may recall. Students were seen on the streets, being brutalized by private security, by police, and then different civil society organizations came together and thought the Section 17 right of the Constitution is ignored totally when it comes to enforcement, to application, to how those people are dealt with on the ground, how the activists are dealt with on the ground. Hence then the formation of right to protest. We have, I think at this stage, we have 14 different civil society organizations who sit on our steering committee and they decide the work we do, even though we tap a tail and the work we want to do, because we're responding to trends that we see on the ground. And everybody has been speaking about, if I'm noting it very well, accountability, change, legitimacy, active participation in our democracy. And those are the pillars, those are our focus areas at Right to Protest, because we want to get to the communities to say that you do have a right to get to the streets and hold institutions, private or public, accountable. You know, when we speak about accountability, we think that it's accountability, government should be held accountable. It's not only government. We have mining affected communities who are dealing with mining areas, mining companies who are constantly violating human rights. And I often say this thing, that at the center of every human right that we are gathered here and fighting for is the right to protest. Looking at the history of South Africa, people took it to the streets. I like it, Umama, when she said, "Ukuthi uzwakala ma uya emgwaqweni," and you take it to the streets. That's basically my opening statement in every workshop that we do. You take it to the streets, but we as Right to Protest, we're saying that let us not demonize protest. Let us as activists get to the streets and say, we are protesting in the manner that is consistent with the law. And if police shoot us and if they respond with violence, at least we know that we have actually we are abiding by the law. In this focus area that everybody has been speaking about, the accountability, you will time me, facilitator, because when I start talking, it becomes weird. There's a memorial service of the late Thulani Maseko that I attended at UP. Mr. Malunga from Open Society, when he addressed the issue of accountability linked and the intersection of protest and accountability in our democratic Africa, because he was addressing the African states. He then said, the people who are actually gatekeepers of our liberation are the people who actually fought for the very same liberation, which then provoked a thought in me that, did we have, when we protested as the country against apartheid, did we then foresee accountability? Did we foresee us as political parties, as civil society organizations, being held accountable in the same manner that we actually questioned apartheid? And the biggest problem is that when protesters get to the streets, they actually received with brutality. We've seen not so long ago, and these things are not spoken about. It's like mysteries when we come into spaces like this and speak about people who die, who are not even involved in protests. There's a kid, we never saw that thing on the news in Joe Slovo in Gauteng, but that kid was actually killed in the hands of police, and he was basically coming from school. And that is not the only kid. We had another one in Mpumalanga, because we're in the space where we see these things, that protests have actually gained a narrative of being demonized, being an act of criminality. And I'm gonna appeal to everybody in this room that let us change the narrative. I did mention that the 4 key areas that people were speaking about is accountability and change. But in change, I want to say, let us change the narrative of protests, because protests are not about, let us burn tires, let us do this, let us, and also in the sense of police perspective, let them respond with the violence that they come with, and change the narrative of protest, change the whole demonizing of protest. Because immediately when people protest, the resistance you get even from the people you're trying to hold accountable is that you are violent. you are disruptive. But bottom line is that protests by their very nature are disruptive. People come empty-handed singing Amaguicho, Senzenina and all that. And the response they get is shoot them. Is that even proportional in our democratic states, constitutionalized states? Definitely not. And as right to protest, we are saying, let us advance that right. But it starts with, I love what a person from Rise Mzansi said, that it is everybody's responsibility. It cannot be only right to protest seeking to actually educate people that you can protest in a manner that is consistent with the law. At the same time, you can hold these people accountable. Because at the same time, you want democracy to function in a manner that speaks to you as a community. And it cannot function in such a manner that speaks to you as a community, as this community in this room, if you do not actually hold whatever institution accountable, but do so in such a manner that you're not labeled as hooligans. And I know this is one of the deepest things, one of the most complex part of protest is that, but how do we then say we are not treated as hooligans if a camera from a major media house only covers me burning a tire, but never covers a police who provokes me to actually burn that tire, or who provokes me to throw a stone? We often see people throwing stones, but as for us as right to protest who go on the ground, it never starts with communities throwing stones. You will disagree with me on this, but there's one major question which we run our programs through, that who is armed in protest when we speak about brutality? Who is armed in protest when we speak about violence? We've seen students in Fees Must Fall. They literally walked in with their hands up. That is in terms of war, for those of us who studied history of international law and stuff. You raise your hand, politics and international relations. Some must have seen this whole topic. The minute the sign of surrender, opening up, raising your hand, and those students were still shot at. And the narrative that has been pushed in our media houses, and it extends down to communities where we say, we get to communities teaching them about the right to protest, and they're like, no, but I do not want to be a troublemaker. But you are not. You are holding institutions accountable, because at the end of the day, I can't come up and say, this democracy doesn't work for me if I don't hold this democracy accountable. And if the mechanism of me holding it accountable is for me to understand that I have a right to protest, and I can exercise that right in a manner that is peaceful and consistent with the bylaws of wherever I am protesting, with the regulations of the Gatherings Act, the Constitution. And if I do that and police still respond with violence, then we on the ground as civil society organization, let's change the narrative that they're pushing out there, that protesters are generally violent. That is basically saying that people from Durban are murderers because there's one person who's convicted of murder. And that's a wrong narrative. It's you preempting that I'll be a violent person by merely exercising my constitutionally guaranteed right, which means that's a smoke and mirrors. That's basically a right which is just only in the Constitution to make the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa look as if it is preaching a certain narrative of public participation, to look as if it is involving the people on the ground. But the minute we question those, we question even the media statements that go out there to label protesters. Because I am of the opinion that the problem is not protesting. I don't think the problem is protesting as far as accountability, one of the accountability mechanisms that we have. I don't think the problem is the legitimacy of protest, because that's another problem that we have, is that we say that that is not a legitimate protest because it doesn't really affect me, then I illegitimize it. I don't think that is really the problem. I think the biggest problem is the widespread demonizing of protest, is the widespread media coverage of protesters being seen as violent people. There is no way that an empty-handed person will walk to an fully armed police officer or private security guard and start hitting that person. Genuinely, that is then to say that people, excuse my French, I heard somebody saying, excuse my French here. That is essentially saying that protesters are stupid. If that's the narrative that we ought to believe, is that if people walk empty-handed into a protest and they are received with violence, and we as this community believe that protesters are the violent ones, then we are essentially saying that they're stupid. Because there's no way I'll attack a person who's fully armed. Police officers, even though we have a problem with them walking into protest with live ammunition and lethal weapons, we have a problem, complex problem with that, because what are you going to do with a live ammunition or a lethal a firearm instead of rubber bullets, you know? Because the whole point of police officers is for them to actually control traffic, ensure that people are actually abiding by the law, guide traffic officers to make sure that the National Road Traffic Act is actually adhered to and the protest still proceed. But the problem is that their role as they get into protest, I'm sorry if I am actually naming and shaming police, is assumed at a very negative instance of violence, which is wrong. Because if everybody can exercise every other right in the Constitution without being questioned, then why not the right to protest? And one thing we often forget is that through that right, we have this democracy that we speak about. Through that right, there's certain other, not only in the African context, there are also other Arab states which actually held governments accountable for human rights violations using protests. And it is protest at the center, at the DNA of every human right that exists. Protests are there. And how now it seems like I'm actually presenting problems. I'm going to leave you with what I call probing questions, because I was a criminal defense attorney before this, is how many of you know the processes of going to give a notice when you want to protest? In this room, by a show of hands, how many of you know where to go? What is the process when I want to actually give a notice and protest in the manner that is consistent with the law? You see, you did because you were in our workshop. I see 2, 3, my eyes are horrible. You see, it's not even a handful of us in this room. But now, how do we then go back to say that we are saying police are wrong, but we also don't know how right we can be, whether we are right or wrong? Because if you don't know that, this is what I have to follow, these are the processes I have to follow to exercise my right to protest, then how do we then get to be able to say, fine, police are wrong, at the same time, am I right? You know, be right, make sure your houses are in order. Let the civic education not only be limited to your line of work, let it extend to the right to protest, because at the center of those, you want people to go out and vote, but make sure that you familiarize yourself with the regulations of the Gatherings Act, the bylaws of the area, which office at the municipality is responsible for making sure that people know their right to protest, because they also have a constitutional obligation to teach people these things. Do they do it? Definitely not, because everybody in this room doesn't know how to give notice. And the other thing is, I already touched on this, the importance of knowing your bylaws. You see, with the right to protest, it's there in the Constitution, reduced to the enabling legislation, the regulations of the Gatherings Act, and then we have municipalities here on the ground enforcing it. And what happens in Durban definitely does not happen in Limpopo, and it definitely does not happen in Eastern Cape. The office which deals with the right to protest in each municipality is based on the bylaws of that municipality. Familiarize yourselves as the civil society organization leaders to teach the people, because elections are coming. It's a campaign year this year. The South African Police Service released a statement, not a statement, rather a statistics, to say that at least 26 protests per day are actually happening in South Africa. And we disagree with that stat, because of the 26 that they mentioned are reported protests. And those are the people who actually gave in notices. What about spontaneous protesters who actually decide, we as Guamashu community are walking to the councillor's house? You know, that is a protest, which means there's more protests happening in the country. This is just the campaign year. And we are teaching people about their right to vote and so on and so forth. But equally so, while we are teaching on the right to vote, let's teach them how to protest the right way, using positive ways of ensuring that their protest is actually a success and is legitimate. And the third thing I wanted to leave you with was, what is our duty towards ensuring that the protests are not demonized, treated as an act of criminality? We get to assume and speak in spaces like this, and it is a by the way. I'm honored to be here. But towards what threatens our democracy, because I am of the opinion, many of you may disagree with me, I'm of the opinion that at the center, not only of human rights, but at the center of our democracy is us being given a platform to hold government accountable. And that, in the South African context, happens through protests. And if people do not know how to do that, they do not know what to abide with, and they do not know how to challenge the narrative that is being pushed there, pushed to the public about protests being criminal acts and so forth and so on, then we are, as civil society organizations, failing our people. We want our people to act in a certain way, our communities to respond, to hold to account, but we're not providing, Elsie, you spoke about tools. We're not providing those tools, and those tools are not financial tools only. It's education. It's us having the conversations, caucus, and we speak about these things, and we explore these things. You know, we discuss quite a lot, informally so. And in those discourses, one thing leads to another one, and it goes to democracy doesn't work. And believe me not, what happens on the streets and on the ground is that we discuss very informally about how democracy, how it doesn't work. What did this government do for me? But in those conversations, it is our duty to sprinkle that you can actually hold them accountable. These are the mechanisms that you can use to hold these institutions that you blame for A, B, C, D accountable, right? And what is the other part? The last one. The last one was basically on active participation and sustaining democracy. I am of the opinion that you cannot sustain democracy without accountability. And if we agree that if people know how to protest, where to protest, what is effective protest, and by effective protest, it's not about tires being burned, because we've had these stats, we have a report going on, which is coming out in October, that people think being arrested, then I'm a true activist. That's not true. You are not. You're just arrested.
Credentials.
You know, there's that narrative that we push amongst ourselves that, you know, I went to jail for this. No. This is not pre-1994. This is South Africa, where your criminal record will not be expunged. But think for yourself. You say a girl gotta eat, but I want to take it a step further that I am an activist, and at the same time, I have a future. And that future does not include me having a criminal record. And I did mention that I've been in the criminal justice system before. I worked there. It's very hard when a person calls you and say, I protested at DUT during what, and now I have a public violence thing on my conviction on my name. And I mean, the processes to expunge that, very long processes. So this whole thing of a successful protest is you being arrested. That is not true. That narrative has to be actually dismantled at all costs. And it is our duty as people sitting in this room to go educate the masses and tell them that being arrested is not you being a liberalist, is not you being a liberator of any kind. Being arrested is you getting into the criminal justice system, and to get out of that system is very hard. And spending 48 hours in jail is the hardest thing a person can ever go through.
Yeah.
And we don't have the worst jail systems. I've seen the worst, worked in Cape Town, seen the worst, which is Colesman, overcrowded and such. But when you see somebody in such a very vulnerable space, then you'll understand that it is basically our duty to go and educate people who are protesting that don't get arrested. And they're like, but ma'am, you will take me out. He said, no, but the truth is, I'll argue the law, but I won't argue the criminal record if the case is very compelling against you.
Yeah.
There is nothing anybody can do if you are convicted. Yes, we can appeal, go through the whole processes of our justice system. But truth of the matter is that if that conviction stands, the minute you apply it first rate, they'll be like, no, thank you. You have a criminal record. So let us take it upon ourselves to educate people to understand what it means to have a successful protest. What can we do post-protest? And I had 10 minutes and you are looking at me like that. It's very, it doesn't end with us saying, let's go to the ward councillor.
Yeah.
It goes beyond that. Let's hand in a memorandum. Let's inform them that on this particular day, we want answers. And on this, when you give us these answers, and we're going to come back 6 months later, we are a resilient community. We will come back 6 months later and hold you accountable and say, you said you were going to give us water by June, and it's July, there's no water. You know, those are successful protests. We're not saying police are not going to arrest everybody, but we're saying that it is very imperative of us to go on the streets and treat people and inform people that being arrested is not being a successful liberalist.
Thank
It's
you so
not
much.
you being
Thank
a
you so much.
liberator.
Yeah.
And thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Vuyagazi, for your inputs. We're going to give an opportunity to the rest of the team in the room to also offer some questions and thoughts, but after John Taylor III, John R. Taylor III has got an opportunity to speak. So John is a founder and a co-chair at the Black Male Initiative, which is based in Georgia, United States. He is a poet, a dedicated husband, a devoted father, and committed advocate for creating equity, sustainability, and empowerment for communities of color. He has a deep passion for Black youth. He's already getting a round of applause from the next room, so you'll better follow suit as well, please. Yeah.
All right. Are we ready? Sabon. You feel. Yeah. Y'all weren't expecting that, right? So I have the pleasure to serve today and speak to you on behalf of our organization, Black Male Initiative Fund, Black Male Initiative in Atlanta, Georgia. So we are a civil society organization that is focused on 5 pillars of work. We deal with education, as my little brother KJ spoke about earlier, civic engagement, criminal justice and restorative justice reform, economic enfranchisement, and Black mental health and wellness. We focus on Black men because, quite frankly, we are ignored in the States. if I'm honest, we're ignored in many places. But that's not because we don't have valid opinions, it's because people are quite frankly afraid of us. I mean, let's be honest. If I walk into a room with you alone, won't you be just a little scared? Yeah. Because the lion at the zoo is majestic and beautiful. But the lion in the parking lot, oh my God, let me get my keys and get into my car. That is what we are. But today, I want to talk to you about how similar our communities have become. This is not a good thing. So when we ask by what right does this brash American think that he can come to South Africa and talk to you about civil society? Well, it's because my elders and those that taught me, Ambassador Andy Young, Dr. Joseph Lowry, Reverend James Owen, they came here in '94 and they helped oversee the first set of elections. They met with Chief Atula, with Brother Sabuka's grandchildren. They made a commitment that they would continue to work and grow in this community. See, you didn't know, even my brother, when he invited me here, did not know that you were bringing me home. What I'm holding in my hand is my ANC membership card. I have a number. I'm not just a visitor. In 2002, I stood in the streets and protested in Sandton, in Joburg, against the police at the United Nations Energy Caucus. They put machine guns in our face. And little sisters from Eastern Cape put flowers in their face. And I'd like to think it was humanity, but it was probably because I had a badge on that said United Nations Delegate. They didn't shoot us in the face. But we protested. We were proud of it. 2003, 2004, working with labor, we protested. And we were proud of it. 2005, 2006, we were on the streets. I was there for the ESCOM strike. I heard workers at the airport argue over who was going to get the day off so that they could join the ESCOM strike. We protested. I put on my jeans and my shirt, my Satawu shirt, and I went outside and we started saying, oh, oh, oh. And I said, oh, this is amazing. And my brother Paul Nupawi said, look back, come. And I looked back and there were about 1 million people behind me. And then my other brother, Philemon Bimbe, said, hey, look forward, come. And there was about 1 million people in front of me. And then he said, just look over there. And the stop sign, folks had joined into the toy, and the stop signs were waving. I was standing still and I was bouncing. Because that is the power of protest, of organizing, of growth, of mobilizing people in the streets. I love what my sister said. We must take it to the streets. We had a problem. So we did all this in the US, you know. We know the apartheid government went to the US government and had conversations about segregation and Jim Crow laws, and that helped to shape the way that your system looked. And we know that in '94, some of your folks and some of my folks came together and we had conversations about liberation and protest and civil rights and how it should look. And then from 2002 to 2008, every year, multiple times a year, I came here. Oftentimes to Durban. KZN became my home. See, what you don't know, and what I didn't know, because I didn't read the top of the program, so you can call it an agenda, but I didn't read the top of the program. See, the top of the program said Elengane. I sat in the van because it hurt. Because the last time I was here in 2008 with Reverend Owen, he died that year. But the last time we were here, we were talking about students and youth mobilizing at the University of KwaZulu-Natal with Professor P. We were talking about how we were going to build power and make sure that y'all didn't go through some of the same challenges that we went through in America during the civil rights movement. We were talking about how our future does not have to be like your past. We were talking about how similar our struggles are in their inception, but how different the outcomes could be. See, as a matter of fact, we talked about a lot of things. My wife, then girlfriend, came with me on that trip. Look out the window. There's a park, really, look out the window. You don't have to get up, but just look that way. I stood downstairs in a coffee shop in this hotel, Southern Sun Ilangay, and I walked across the street. The premier at that time, Spool in the Belly, cleared the park for me. I took my girlfriend on a walk, knelt down up under a light, and proposed to her with South African diamonds. And she said yes. And then we got married. But my leader died before then. He died in February. We were married June 7th, 2008. And as a commitment to him, I took an assignment to come back here in 2008. And I worked for 5 months with Satali, some of the best organizing ever, with security officers, G4S, security. I lived in Joburg. I lived in Yoga. Not only did I learn more about the community, but I saw some darkness rising. 2008 was hard for South Africa. The xenophobic attacks, the beatings, burnings, frustration, the othering of humans. They are taking our job. I watched protest turn on itself, turn on the community. And I decided that, and I'll get to the point. I decided that South Africa was serving a dragon, not a phoenix. So I left South Africa and I spent the next near decade of my life trying to destroy our own dragon at home. See, I believe that political movements really come in two ways. They come in the way of the dragon or the way of the phoenix. If you are a dragon, then you amass power and you are strong. When you align with the dragon, you are comfortable under the dragon's wing. When you align with the dragon, and as long as you stay close to the dragon as one of its scales, you protect the dragon. But don't forget, the dragon does not protect its scale. It protects its soft belly. Its scales fall off and then new scales come. It churns through scales. It amasses wealth, gold, hoards it under itself to keep its belly safe. It has no care for its scales because those come and go. Civil society organizations function as those scales. Not only do they protect the dragon, but they hold the dragon in comfort. They keep the dragon from being harmed. Sometimes they fall off and they're crushed by the dragon. The dragon holds no funeral for its fallen scale. The dragon does not listen to its scales when it decides how it moves and where it goes. The dragon merely steps past its scale. Because the dragon is only concerned with remaining strong and being a dragon. So we went home and we fought our dragon, the Democratic Party. We decided that we were going to hold them accountable. We were going to put individuals in office that looked like us. And guess what? No matter how many times we elect someone to office in the United States, whether they are Black or white or other, they still find a way to protect the dragon. They still find a way to defend imperialism. When there is no food in my community, when there is poor housing in my community, when there is no access to proper education, when there is no access to water, when there is no access to healthcare, I come from a place that is dealing with many of the same issues that the beautiful people of Mzansi. See, the dragon continues to grow until it cannot fly. It can't travel around its region. It lives in its cave, disconnected from the scales that have fallen, disconnected from the community it is supposed to protect. We decided to stop fighting for dragons. We decided that we were no longer choosing our champion, but we were choosing our opposition. So don't ask me if I like President Obama. Don't ask me if I like Joe Biden. Please don't ask me if I have any interest in Donald Trump, Kamala Harris. Don't even ask me if I'm interested in Stacey Abrams. Because I know, we know, our movement of young brothers and sisters at home know that we don't choose our champions. We choose our opposition. And then we started to get creative. We began to think like a phoenix. See, I like a phoenix. The most interesting thing about the phoenix is not that it's immortal, but it's that it carries its history and knowledge in its feathers. Each feather, a library of experience. Each feather, incendiary. So see, a phoenix will periodically realize that it has become too strong and has too many feathers. It will realize that it carries too much weight and is disconnected from its own body. And it begins a process of reflection in which every feather is dissected down to a molecular level. Yes, this is mythical. These creatures are not real, but neither is true democracy yet. So we can speak about fantasy and apply it practically in our work. See, what I love most about a phoenix is that when the phoenix has completed its mission and it has reviewed the knowledge of its spinal feather, each feather simultaneously bursts into flame and it engulfs the entity that was considered to be the phoenix. But the phoenix does not die. It casts off those parts of itself that are no longer useful. It evolves, it innovates, it recreates something that might resemble what it used to be, but is so much stronger and so much more powerful that it has renewed life. I am going to urge South Africa to stop fighting dragons and to embrace your identity as a phoenix. Civil society organizations are not apolitical actors reviewing the policy of the political space, making recommendations and praying like God that the dragon will hear me. You're wasting your breath. Dragons breathe fire, they don't talk to. Sorry. But instead, take your rightful place amongst the feathers of your phoenix. Realize that you play a critical role, not just in the understanding, the heritage, the history of a thing, but in its future. Civil society organizations must take up the accountability mechanism of holding not just political systems accountable, but political actors accountable as well. It is critical that when your system rises from these ashes, when your system rises to its new glory, that you be a part of it. That there are members from your organization that are part of those feathers. Because your job is not to critique the system, it is to help the system fly. Your job is to hold the system accountable so that it can reach new heights and do new work. Your job is to never let the system forget that while once it defended and protects you, it must always do so, even into your future. Your job is simple. You must ride. Mzansi, you must ride. And as you do so, you must learn from our mistakes. One last time. Please do not allow dictators and fascists, oligarchs, and greedy people to all of the resource from your community and leave you hungry and hurting. And you walk around carrying their badge and their flag or their placard or their card because you have some allegiance, some sympathy. You remember when, oh my God, they were with us then. The power of, well, if the individuals that were the detractors of the state in 94 have become the state in 2024, then it might be time for a change to ensure that what's in the state governs what is of the state. That is Umzan. See, we both come from the dirty South. We understand. We flew here to support you and to share a cautionary tale. And I will end by saying this. Man, it is amazing to watch South Africa take to the streets. When did you decide that protest was inappropriate? I mean, look, all protocols observed, but when did you decide that it was okay? See, during apartheid, they shot at you, but who was sending the order to pull the trigger? Let's not get to a point where now during Ephesians 4, they shoot at you, but it's supposed to be my own people holding the gun. That's friendly fire. You get fired for that at home. Why would you ever turn your guns on your own people? See, we know the police in Atlanta don't protect us. It is the most terrifying moment that any Black man will have when he is riding around Atlanta in his car and blue lights come on behind him with a little whoop, whoop siren. The building I work in, I was taking out the trash. And as I was taking out the trash, a police officer rolled up on me. 3 times this happened. The 4th time it happened, he got out of his car, walked around the back of my truck, and had his hands on his hips. Well, if you know anything about police in America, their gun belts are worn on their hips. He walked around my truck at 8:48 p.m. at dusk with his hand on his gun. I was throwing away trash, but I was terrified. Because if you don't see a young lion as something to praise, trust, support, but you see a young lion as a threat, then your first instinct is to shoot, not be a caretaker. So yeah, I love it when South Africa takes it to the streets. It's one of the reasons I got this call. It's one of the reasons I proposed to my wife out there. It's one of the reasons I agreed to work here. It's one of the reasons that I have a 21-year relationship with South Africa. It's the reason why I brought those 4 young men over here to be with you, because we are passing down a new generation of organizers. Dakari, stand up. Dakari Paxton is 24 years old. I was 23 on my first trip. I wonder what 20 more years will do when he brings someone else. Adema and KJ are with me. Nothing in our crew, except for me, is over 35. If you don't invest in your young people, you doom them to failure and death, apathy and exclusion. You give them no place to call their own. Why can't we build houses for them? Why can't we pay for matriculation? Why can't we make sure that they have food, clothes, and shelter the way they deserve to? Why can't we do the things that they ask of us when they do the thing that you ask of them? If I ask anyone from South Africa, oh, Baba, I'm from the South. We grow here. We are strong. And whether it's Eastern Cape and I am closer to the poor, or it's KZN and I am a Zulu man, no matter what part of South Africa, the brothers and sisters in South Africa identify as being with South Africa. So how dare we have a dragon that won't hear them? How dare we not become a phoenix that incorporates not only their voices and their words? And I'll close by saying, not only should we continue to protest and take it to the streets, but it just might be time for you to take some of the streets into your parliament. It just might be time for you to get some of these young folks that you speak so fervently about and have them hold office. It just might be time for you to rise. Thank you.
Um, Thank you very much, John. Yeah, it's going to be a bit awkward speaking after him. You guys, he's a poet, as I said. So sometimes you get mesmerized by the, you know. I don't have the same thing, but hopefully my voice is equally as mesmerizing at some point. I think did John say rise, young lions, young? Is it that? Am I confusing the two platforms, or is it the two? All right. Thank you very much to you, John, for bringing your team here, your commitment to the work that you're building in our country, and I think we also look forward to an invitation for many of us who consider ourselves Phoenix. I don't know what's the plural of Phoenix, but anyways, many Phoenix. Phenai, yeah, phenomenons, phenoms, okay, to try and see what sort of exchanges we can have with the organization going forward. I think it's an important one. We value the work that you've done. We continue to value the relationship that you have with this country. Luvuyogazi, thank you very much for your inputs. I do apologize to both of you that we're not going to have an opportunity to engage you directly, but I feel that lunch is also an appropriate platform. Luvuyogazi has a late flight tonight, so she can't tell you that she's got another engagement to go to. So please also engage her directly about where are the tools that you will require in order to organize, if it means ukuthi niyoshisa impepho emgaqweni. Usisiblessing wangifundisa ukuthi mina protest akusikona ukuthi nje siyashunqisa nje, kodwa yabo sishisa impepho. Kumele kube khona abavukelwayo, yabo abantu abadala. Khona kuzozwakala ukuthi yabo sishintshe indaba zomsamo namhlanje konakele. So it's important for us to engage it on that facet as well. I'll allow Dr. Kariuki and the team to convene us for another 10 minutes for a very important part of the program and the process that we have for today. As we continue to do the work of organizing civil society, of organizing different constituents and communities, it's important to acknowledge that we do this work not by ourselves, but with other very important stakeholders in the space as well. And we hope that this is in part a starting point for us to start to actually be in unison as a civil society movement. Of course, Dr. Kariuki is now ready. The mic is there. Lunch is upstairs. Once Dr. Kariuki is done, we do ask our speakers for just one more picture, because Luvuyoga's was unavailable at the previous one. We'll take one quick speakers group picture, and then we ask that you travel safe and be well. But angivalelisi ngiyaxolisa, ubalulekile lo msebenzi esiwenzayo manje, so please do also pay attention to that. Ngiyabonga.
Right, thank you so much, Brian. Let me put our hands together for my colleague, Brian, for holding this process so well and able to allow us to have these meaningful conversations and engagement. And I think, I hope that you really understand why we do what we are doing. It's not just a space for us to come and have great time and enjoy. And that's part of what we try to do, because we also want to create that platform where you can connect with each other. We rarely have these moments all the time. But more importantly, is to be able to piece up threads like what we've just had from our colleagues sharing their experiences, and you seeing where you can fit into that process, including networking with them. We do not restrict you from interacting with them in any way. In fact, if our platforms as DDP create opportunities for you to build on what you're doing, that's a plus for us. So please do take advantage of that and be able to engage with them on that level. And if you feel that is something that you can work with them forward, please do so. And if it turns out to be something that is meaningful for you or for your organization, please also don't forget to report back. Right. Now, at this point in time, as we've been doing over the last couple of months, we are choosing this year to celebrate our colleagues who have worked with us in different spaces, in different activities of helping our work grow over the last 3 decades. And while we cannot do this for everyone, we have handpicked organizations that have helped us to work with us in this area of civic education that have consistently worked in terms of enabling us to deepen our reach, to create more platforms and be able to take our message to communities where we could not have done directly. And so we're going to continue that for every conference that we are doing. And so for today, we want to honor the following organization. Black Search, represented by our dear friend and colleague, Evashini Naidu. Shall we put our hands together for them? Good stuff. Thank you very much. All right. The next group we're going to have is our brother, Sanele Hadebe. We're going to, I don't know who between you and Uzi who is speaking up. Is it the two of them? Sanele. Okay, Sanele. Right. Thank you, my brother. We really appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Thanks.
And we honor you for that. All right. Thank you, my brother. Right. The next one is Mr. Msizi Kumalo. We really appreciate you, my brother, and the work that you've been doing with us. All right. Thank you so much for your patience. I would like to say this before we finish. I think our next conference is on there. Okay. Yes.
Which is the traditional leaders one. That has a specific constituency. If you know you're not a traditional leader, unfortunately, you're not invited. And then in October, we'll be having our local government conference to which you're all invited.
Yes.
So
So we got two conferences coming up that will need your, okay, so that one for traditional leaders, that's specifically for them, for that work that DDP is doing with traditional leadership in this province. And that's coming up next month. But the next one that we're going to see all of you is in October for the local government conference. Please do not miss that one. It's an exciting lineup, and we're going to have a great moment in terms of also honoring organizations that have worked with us, including political parties, for their ability to help us in that work. Thank you so much, and I wish you well, and please travel safe. Thank you.
All right, before you leave, can you give Paul a round of applause quickly? I also want to say we appreciate and acknowledge your consistent and constant support of our work. We hope that we will help each other in making sure. Yeah, cool. Ngizosuke ngiyeke phela ukunibonga, ngibonga nina mina manje. Ngiyabonga kakhulu, ilokho kuphela ngikushoyo, ngiyabonga. Thank you very much. Our colleagues from Georgia will be enjoying the beach this afternoon. So if ungenabo abantu abadala, I think you can join them. Yezwa ngithi uma ungenalo idlozi elikuhluphayo elingakuthatha nolwandle. Yeah. All right, siyabonga. Please make sure that you have your tag and a ticket for lunch, which is upstairs. Thank you. Colleagues, a quick picture. A quick picture. John? Quick picture. No. Really? Yeah. Uluvuyo ka. Ngani guys?
Hey, more light. Paint the sight and so I dark days friends you so right. Turn that pain to fuel to survive. Ooh, ooh, now I'm stronger. Backstage in the coupe like lotion. Spin moves in the paint like Jordan. Go
madam?
bullshit. That's
Okay, one
total.
second. What this?
Start sign. Pull up and shine at nurture. Galaxy boy, that's culture. I've been on top for a long time. Chubby on cheeks on my beat combines. People say hip hop died, that's nonsense. Thank God they showed their true colors. Switched up beyond the black bug.
Mr. Neil.
I take it on.
Come back and watch. This is that. Was on. Was on native certificate then? Was on native certificate? Fed. Share my gift. Come on, native certificate. Spano Shotala. Ivashni, bring your certificate. Mrs. Kumalo. Upstairs. Mrs. Kumalo. What's the kitchen? What's about? The certificate sack. Wait, 1 second, 1 second. Even me. Okay. Yes, please, come through. We'll make space for you in the middle. Cool. Paparazzi. I wanna you got that proximity now, proximity to power. Yeah,
Next thing with the lips and curves in my corner, a 10 on my left. My daughter, giving her some plans, Papa Nace of a young.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Damn, that nigga's a fossil. Now everything is all right. See my new car, right? Put up to the show and it was sleeping. The energy was weak. Gave me some more vibe. Always out the country. Guess I was I die. Or they pull me over on black, I might die. SATS, cool, drink, high five. SA, what a place to reside. Tired, Durban, ever great side. Living on a highway, pepper steak pie. But black don't crack, so I bet I ate fine. Had a little thing called Tide. Wrote a little thing called Die. She wrote a little thing called I. Wrote a little thing called Rise. Never told lies. You just can't see it with your own eyes. I get concerned. I take it all the way. I'm playing hard to get. It's like the difference. Love was to lemonade. Love was to long. It's like suit, it's like pull out the set, zip up the off-white, up to the neck, turn up the ace, it's hot in the back, pull out the slate cleats, pull out the ace, like suit, it's like pull out the set, zip up the off-white, up to the neck, turn up the ace,